Yeah, we're off. Hi, guys.
Look, the important thing I think about nurse and midwives' health is they have a great relationship with nurses.
Hi, Diane. Hi, Tricky. Good to see you guys. No, I'm okay, mate. Nothing wrong with me. Fine and fit. Thanks for asking, though. Okay, let's jump ahead. Okay, let's just.
Hey, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the American Invictus Show. Today, I have on with me the guest instructor for the active shooter training that's coming up in June, Mr. Steve Reyes. Steve is a former 18 Delta Special Forces medic. He's had multiple deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan, and he was also a SEER instructor. So the man has a lot of knowledge for what we're going to be covering here soon. We're just going to have a basic conversation about things that are going on in the world, and I'm going to be probing Steve's mind about what his responses to certain things that are going on right now would be, and how his advanced knowledge of danger would help us in a actual dangerous time that's coming up in America. So without further ado, Steve, brother, thank you for coming on with us tonight and sharing your vast amount of information. And let's get started, man. I have a question for you. We have now been told that 50 senators have been issued satellite phones because of a pending communication.
It's only 4 hours old, guys.
Disruption that's going to be supposedly nationwide in 2024 that would interfere with the elections. What do you make of this latest comment, this latest speculation that we're going to have mass communication problems here in America?
Well, first of all, it's good to be with you, Doug. I appreciate our relationship, our friendship, and our collaboration, and I enjoy listening to your show. So hopefully this will be a meaningful exchange between us for whoever happens to be listening. As you probe my brain, I hope the probe doesn't come back empty. So
Prayers
we'll
for you, Tricky. Always prayers for you, brother.
So as far as current events and what in the world is going on with our government, I have my thoughts on it. They would certainly be very unorthodox for a lot of people. Who or what entity is in control of our government and the world governments?
Okay, he's on the ball. Who or what entity, which is good. Yeehaw, this looks like it's going to be good.
you know, I'm inclined to think it's not of this, you know, not of earthly origin. So the scheme and the plans that are coming down, I don't know, other than the fact that I'm not surprised. I'm prepared, you know, you know, trying to be prepared as we are trying to prepare people, whoever are willing to participate. You know, we want to, you know, prepare them for future events, probably a lot of things that are going to be chaotic and difficult for a lot of people to manage. So as far as these senators are concerned in this communications, I don't know. Did you get my computer just said recording stop, recording in progress. So disruptions just like that. Did you get that message, or was that just my computer?
Nope, that happens.
Okay, it just happens. Okay,
that happens from time to time.
But we're back live again. So I don't know, but you know, I simply find this all very interesting. You and I are accustomed to extreme circumstances. I happen to be motivated by it. I know where my assurance comes from and where my security comes from. It comes from my relationship with the creator of heaven and earth. And so whatever is coming, and I do certainly think that we're going to have disruptions in our normal ability to communicate, buy, sell, all those, you know, move from point A to point B. I anticipate disruptions, and this whole deal with the senators is simply an indicator that that's coming.
Wow.
Yeah. Some of the things that I've heard is that we have possible World War III. Obviously, that's going to be occurring in Ukraine with Russia, but that the communication disruption, and once again, it's hard to pinpoint a lot of this, but one of the things I've heard is the communication disruption will come internally. So it's kind of a red flag, false flag. And that, you know, and here's the thing that's interesting is that these 50 senators, all senators were issued these satellite phones. Supposedly only 50 of them took them. But you and I both know that the senators, the congressmen, the vice president, the cabinet, Pentagon, the Joint Chiefs, all these high priority people in our government are going to be taken care of and rushed to underground facilities where they'll have the necessary life-sustaining needs to be met for them and their family. But the rest of us heathens, will be stuck out here in ground zero. So let's just go ahead and just put ourselves in ground zero. Let's say the communications disruption has happened. One of these days, you and I are probably going to either be outside doing something or waking up that day, and our phones are no longer going to work. Now, I'm not going to say the power is going to go out, not at first, but let's say the phones aren't working. You can't send a text message. You can't receive a phone call. Your emails aren't updating. What would be some of the first things popping into your mind that is a indicator that something very bad has happened? And obviously going through the steps of checking to see, hey, is your phone working? Is my neighbor's phone working? And when we all decide nobody's phones are working, what would be one of the next steps that you would be doing for preparedness?
Zoe always thought chatting about insurance was boring until she spoke to Yui.
Nicole was a great listener.
I know I'm putting you on the spot right now, but I want
well, it's kind of an interesting scenario. for phones to just suddenly not be working, so, what am I going to do? If I'm going to get into my vehicle, because I'll be living in the middle of, I don't have any neighbors, in the mountains on 13 acres. And, so I would have to drive into town in order to try to determine, okay, what's going on? Is this isolated to my device, or is everybody?
I'm an Australian trigger because I got the beer stocked with fridge. No, the fridge stocked with beer. I said it round the wrong way.
Experience this, and what do I observe when I get into town, and look for who else is everyone experiencing this. So to me, that's just, if that happens, it's only the beginning of the demise of life as we are accustomed to. And so, more than communication for me, it's just, food, water, shelter, and just home security, being prepared to defend. Because if it's just communication that's out, but everything else is functioning, and we're able to buy and sell and get food and water, then that's kind of a weird scenario for it to be so singularly isolated to just communication.
Well, what's one of the things that we expect to happen before we invade a country? We take out communication, command and control, and then power. So these are some of the things that come across my mind. So obviously that's what we did in Iraq. And, some of the things that I try to put myself in these scenarios. What would I do if I walk around and, my phones aren't working? Probably one of the things that I would do is I would turn my truck on and I would try to get onto the radio stations, try and listen to what the terrestrial radio stations are saying. I have a VHF radio, so I'd probably get on there, try and listen to what NOAA is saying, or any other, anyone who's speaking on ham radio. Being veterans, we know that typically we are a little tight-knit group of people. And there are times, and I'll just say this as veterans, that we speak to each other differently than we do a normal civilian at times. So it wouldn't be hard for me to go to law enforcement or go to, the VFW hall and try and ask anyone that I know of, hey, what are you getting? What are you knowing? Because everybody knows a little bit of information, and I can piece together, an after action report, more or less, of what's going on with all that little bits of information. Most likely, your mayor is not going to know anything. Most likely, nobody will know anything that first 24 hours. And if phones are cut off, this is what's interesting. If phones are cut off, does that mean the towers are down? Does that mean the underground cables are cut? And if so, does that mean internet is down? And does that also mean satellites are down? So if we're losing all three, we are in big trouble, right? So to lose the towers, they have to be destroyed. To lose the underground cables, they have to be dug up and destroyed. And obviously to lose the satellites, they have to be destroyed. Or it has to be some sort of a massive cyber attack, which is what the WEF, the World Economic Forum, has warned last year, that 2024 will see multiple attempts of major cyber attacks.
Wow.
And then another one was a guy named DC Drano. He tweeted out on Twitter that it was suspected that this would be some sort of a cyber attack that would take down critical information. Obviously, telecommunications is part of our critical infrastructure. So if mainland America loses the ability to communicate with each other, and the government always has little ways to communicate with each other, albeit
Hi, Voss.
somewhat
Good to see
limited
you,
at
mate.
times. Probably one of the first groups of people that I would try to befriend, that I would try to find, is a ham radio operator. Because as long as the hams are up and going, people are going to be talking. And once again, that first 24, 48 hours, maybe 72 hours, you may not know very much. But growing into that 96-hour, 120-hour mark, you're going to know more information, because then, law enforcement's going to be there, fire and medical is going to be there, the hospitals are going to be there, National Guard's going to be there. No one has moved, right? So everyone's still going to be in place. People will speak. What I wonder is that, if and you live a preparedness lifestyle, I live a preparedness lifestyle. That's why we both live on large acres like we do, and we live out in the country like we do. One of the first things that I would want to know is, in my own local environment, what are my neighbors doing? Because I want to, for one thing, I want to find psychosis as quickly as possible with my neighbors, so that I can, say, okay, that's the crazy neighbor is going absolutely crazy. You're always going to have the one guy who's a dedicated ham radio operator who thinks the sky is falling, every other prophecy or conspiracy. So even that guy may have some sort of information. I would not leave any leaf unturned for information. The other thing that I would do, and I'm sure you could probably tag on to this, is that I would enhance my home security. Right? If telecommunications are down, then that's something that's going on in a nationwide attack. Well, there's probably a threat actor, most likely a external threat, that is attacking our infrastructure, and that's typically a prepositioning for war, for an invasion. Mm-hmm. Something that we've all said is coming eventually here in America. We will eventually be invaded. How do we respond? So now that we're there, enhancing your home security, what does that sound like in your mind? What would your day to night schedule of trying to better enhance your home security look like for the average person?
Yeah, I guess, for the average person who's in a community, a neighborhood, and they, have neighbors all around them, then, that's what I'm exiting. Have a house in a neighborhood, but I don't want to be there in this circumstance, because home security becomes much more difficult. But it's where most people are, so they need to be, okay, so what are they going to do? For the average individual, the normal individual who's, surrounded by neighbors, number one, hopefully they have a little network. They have, and if they don't have one, they should be trying to develop one. If I'm going to be in a neighborhood and I've got to deal with neighbors, and I want to know them, and I want to know who I'm going to be able to trust and to collaborate with. It's just, it's a difficult environment to be in if you've got to be taking care of security for yourself and your family and your home and your property, and you don't know, and you're not connected to the people around you. So I would be developing, some network of people, because you may not be able to get around. You might not be able to be, moving about in your vehicle. And so you want to be able to network with those around you. So as far as communication is concerned, especially if I was in a commute in a neighborhood, walkie-talkies would be I would think would be an asset to have, because they got that 5 mile radius or whatever radius happens to be. Well, that covers a whole lot of neighbors that you can be communicating with, and gathering situational awareness about what's happening around them, what's coming towards you. So developing networks would be one of the things, and then equipping those individuals with the ability to communicate and to collaborate together. So that's really a very proactive thing that most people can be doing right now. If you're in the country like you and I are, for me, I'm just using that, look, listen, smell what's going on, using my senses to alert me, to gain situational awareness to what is happening. And if I can use my vehicle, I'm going to have to go travel to find that, to gather more information, so yeah, that's.
I want to put this into people's minds. If the power's still on, but your capability of communicating anybody is not present, then your ability to call EMS or law enforcement, most likely, I would guess, is also not accessible. So for large communities like suburbs, one of the things that I would suggest is to canvass your suburb, have a little town meeting, a suburb meeting. I mean, you might as well consider your suburb to be your town at that point. That is your territory. You have one way in, one way out, most likely. And so, I would be trying to find out who is there, what skills people have, like yourself. Who has knowledge of medicine? Who has knowledge of, the basic functionings of electricity and carpentry in case we need to jerry rig something? We need to do some redneck engineering and create something. These are some of the things where a larger community has an advantage, where you and I, thankfully, I have a crazy, how would you say this gently? I have one of those neighbors I call him my redneck MacGyver. He can literally do almost anything with everything. So, for me, he is what I would call a tactical asset. And I want that guy to live. And I want that guy to like me. Right? Luckily enough, we're friends and we're neighbors. And we're sharing chickens and eggs all the time back and forth. So that's our little, commodity that we've created with one another. Most likely also, if your cell phone's not working, then the internet's not working. Well, you know what else isn't going to work? Being able to use your credit card, being able to use, your phone apps and watch apps on paying stuff. You're going to be stuck with cash, which apparently they're trying to get rid of, and coinage or bartering. So, this will be another thing that you'll be having to consider. How do I pay for commodities, and how do I also sell commodities that I have?
Hi, Talia. Good to see
Here's one
you.
thing for us to also consider is that people will quickly lose tempers, lose their cool during extreme heightened stress events. So you're going to have to deal with those people. And this is my suggestion. It's probably not the most accurate or gentle suggestion. But if you're trying to have a little community to be prepared and self-sufficient and, just try to keep the normal everyday life going, and you have that one or two guys who are hotheads, the town drunks.
I think that's wishful thinking by these guys. I don't think when the shit hits the fan, there's going to be stable places. I think the whole place is going to go crazy.
They're always causing problems, that always have an opinion about everything. You may have to have a contingency plan of how to handle those people, because those people can incite riots. Those people will be spreading rumors and starting problems. And when, you know, the nation is potentially under attack, we got enough problems already. So you'll have to have contingencies for the people around you. I know a friend of mine, he worked for ATF, and I asked him, you know, if we ever got hit with an EMP, what's the first thing you would do? He's like, first thing I would do, I'm going to go visit all my neighbors. I'm like, in what way? He said, well, I know I got the meth heads down the road here. I'm going to go disarm them. And I know I got these people over here. I'm going to go and warn them not to be, you know, doing this and doing that. And I was like, well, that's probably not the best idea to immediately throw yourself out there like that, right? I understand it sounds cool and tough, but like you, I'm very much the gray man. I don't want to be remembered. And when you're my size, it's hard to just kind of blend into crowds. But, you know, I don't want people to see anything about me and say, that guy looks important. That guy, you know, we need that guy. We need to talk to that guy. We need to bother that guy, or that guy's going to be a problem. I don't want to be any of those things. I just want to be a ghost in the wind. You know, so what's your idea of how you would deal with your neighbors then?
And, you know, I mean, in my mind,
Leave them anonymous threats in their letterbox.
it needs to happen before the fact. Before the fact, you need to know who's like-minded, you know, who thinks like you think. And as you said, what are people's skill sets? Who has what skill set? I mean, so like the individual that you just mentioned, if I'm going to be concerned about a certain you know, certain neighbors whom I might consider a threat, and you know, in a situation where normality no longer exists and people are stressed out because they're not able to function normally, I want to know who my battle buddies are, who, you know, and actually, you know, from a security standpoint, that's probably one of my biggest concerns. I do, like you, I am the gray man. I like to be self-sufficient, don't like to depend on other people, not necessarily trying to be recognized or noticed, but I do want to know, certainly would want to know my neighbors and, you know, be a friend, you know, be a friend to those who are, you know, willing to accept that. So yeah, I think people need to be creating networks. I don't know how abnormal you and I are. I don't know if people are just totally clueless. I imagine most of your listeners have that situational awareness that normality, the normal life existence is very precarious right now. The government we are heading in a direction where we're going to see, I think, in the very near future, experiencing the things that we're talking about, some extreme circumstances which are going to disrupt life and cause people to react in extreme fashions. People who will want to capitalize on the disruption in order to, be, dilute, steal, acts of violence, and in a neighborhood is a place where you don't have good security. People are on top of you. People are passing in front of your house. You don't know them. So you really do need to know who you can trust. And I would be very proactive, like you said. Number one, first get to know people. I mean, hard to call, a little town neighborhood meeting. But go to whatever community functions exist in your neighborhood, 4th of July, parades, the local swimming pool, whatever. Get to know your neighbors. Start walking, go for walks. It's going to be healthy, but you can also be observing, those around you, the houses around you, and get to know these people and find out who's on your side and who you can trust, and build some rapport there, and find out what skill sets everybody has. I'd hate to, I mean, that's not the norm. Most people don't know their neighbors, and you're gonna have to depend on more than just yourself, in a neighborhood.
And I think depending on where you live at, that is going to be highly advisable. Like if I lived in the Northwest, I hate to say Portland and Seattle because I was there so much, but if I lived in any type of suburb in the Portland, Seattle area, I would probably go on my little tactical reconnaissance walk, walking the dog. But what I'm really doing is I'm looking for bumper stickers. I'm looking for flags. I'm looking for decals, and I'm trying to find out what you support, if you support anything. And then I'll know when I see rainbow flags and little, Antifa markers and BLM this, and, I'll know who you are, and I'll put that in my mind. And then when I start seeing, thin blue line and stuff that's supporting the military, or, symbols with, Christianity on it, I'll put that in my mind. Okay, these people are here, those people are there.
Yeah.
And then I can put like a little tally up. Who outweighs the other? Okay. Yeah. So then you'll know if it breaks bad in your area, if you're outnumbered or if you got more on your side. And just because they may have some of the same things.
And I reckon all the left-leaning states, you wouldn't want to be caught out there.
Just mention the thin blue line or a veteran or a Christian flag up. Doesn't mean they're going to be on your side immediately. Christians are probably some of the worst people out there at trying to explain their theology or trying to accept another Christian's theology. We see it in the comment section all the time. My Lord, people chew each other up if you're Presbyterian or Catholic or Pentecostal or you name it. Don't even throw in flat earth. I'll go ahead and say that because someone's going to just lose their mind now. So I said flat earth, which is fake. People already are so divided that when it gets really, really bad.
G'day, Chris. Welcome back, mate.
There'll be a point in time where they're going to go through a burnout. So there'll be a point in time where they're going to have their political priorities and they're going to view their world and their neighbors through that. And then after about a week or two, and things are getting really bad, they're going to start putting some of those priorities to the side for its safety and security and reassurance of having a neighbor to be there to watch their six. Because the average person does not think like that because they've never lived like that. But Americans better start thinking like that. We are prompting World War III with two nations right now that have like 20 other nations backing them. And not to mention at least half of our Congress is not on America's side, which that still blows my mind, right? So things aren't in the favor for we the people. And when things break bad in America, if you're not self-reliant, if you don't have that food stocked up, extra batteries, the walkie-talkie radios, if you don't own a gun and extra ammunition,
it's pretty good, isn't
hopefully
it?
you got training on it. We do offer that in case you want it. Hopefully you have medical stuff, and we do offer that for that type of training. Because if you don't have anyone to rely upon, then you have to rely upon you. And if you're nothing but 150 pounds of chewed up bubble gum.
Yeah, Diane, they're not going to be all nice in their neighborhoods and pairing off and that. When the shit hits the fan, things can get really nasty.
Well, my friend, the world is going to spit you out. And man, you've been in places where I've been. People are not kind to each other in other nations, especially when it gets really ugly, really bad. You know, I've walked past places where you have starving kids and people just walk right by them. Ignore.
Chris, I'm really glad you liked it, mate. I'm really happy you got it.
You know, if that's you and people are walking right by you and ignoring you, how are you going to feed yourself? Did you ever think maybe Doritos wasn't the best way to prepare? You know, I mean, I understand that we have priorities, we have bills, and we want to go on vacation. But if you don't have like at least 1 month worth of food, you know what you've created?
Yep, you can trust no one, Diane. I agree.
And in a survival situation, especially with guys like me and Steve, the one thing we never want to be is a liability, because liabilities are the strings that get cut. Right? You want to be an asset. If you're the guy who can fix anything, you're an asset. If you're the lady who's the green thumb gardener, you are an asset. All right. If you know animal husbandry, you're an asset. If you can sew clothes together that have been ripped up, you're an asset. All right. Even the average person, I've had, the little old ladies who've contacted me, and I'm 70 years old and I live in a high-rise apartment and all I do is bake cookies. Hey, lady.
Thank you, Chris. I'm trying to get it out there, mate. I'm hoping one day it'll go viral.
And you can lift someone's moods up and not add stress, you're an asset. But to be that person who is wholly reliant upon alcohol, drugs, pornography, if you're that person who is of the criminal mindset, or you're of the leftist mindset, and I'll say that almost every leftist is a liability right now. And I have no idea.
That's why I said you don't want to get caught out in left-leaning states, because they're very lost and angry and reprobate minds.
Why people choose to live this way, but they have lost their minds.
Yep, reprobate minds.
My little mindset, anyone who believes the Democratic lie is a liability. That is a security risk in my mind. What say you, Steve?
I mean, the thing that's going through my mind is, I think when, I'm fully anticipating when things break down, they're going to break down hard and fast.
Yep.
And I don't know if I wouldn't want to be in a neighborhood unless I knew my neighbors and I knew that I had a network that was trustworthy. So if I live in a neighborhood and I don't have that network, then you're really vulnerable. I mean, the old lady, I mean, if I'm in a city, forget it. I mean, there's no way I would live in a city. If I lived in a city, I would have a place to go to. I would not stay in the city. When anything aberrant went down, okay, cell phones aren't working, I would be thinking, I mean, that even if it's just isolated to all communication is down, well, that's only an indicator that much worse is coming. can't imagine why that would happen in isolation. But nonetheless, I would be anticipating much worse happening, and therefore I need to have, if I cannot be secure where I live because I have a security network in place, then I want to go to a place where I can be secure. I need, some alternate, a safe house, a safe place to go. And that's, whether you buy, an acre of land out in the country somewhere that you get super cheap because it's just empty land, but you go ahead and you put a sea land container on that property because it's unrestricted land. Of course, I'm going to buy unrestricted land, and I'll, maybe I want to have a camper, but
What's that mean, unrestricted land? Does that mean you can build anything you want on it?
I have $1,500 camper, sea land container, all the better. And, one for storage, one for, converting into a living space.
Fast, you live in New York, do you?
But it's going to take that kind of foresight for what's coming down, and it's coming down.
Yeah, that's what I thought, Diane. Yeah.
So, I mean, I've always had property. I've had land. I've never had a lot of money. Enlisted guy in the military, didn't make much money. Sole source of income for my family, and yet, I had property that I could go to. And, we are leaving our neighborhood, and going to our property because I don't think a neighborhood is a safe place to be. But you can live in your neighborhood, but you need a place to go if you don't know your neighbors. If you don't know that you're going to be secure, and if you live in a nice neighborhood, you definitely need a place to go because all the bad characters are coming to your neighborhood, to loot and, take what is yours. And, I wouldn't want to be isolated and an individual in that respect. So, so that's, yeah, people need to plan. They need to be prepared. If you don't have a piece of property, you got time. You got time to prepare to create a network in your neighborhood. So, but like you just said, be an asset, develop some skills. If you don't have survival skills, it doesn't take long. The military, at least the Army adage is see one, do one, teach one. Okay, so come see it happen. Come learn, come to a class and get some hands-on training, see it.
Wow, that's a
Do
long
it. Ours
time.
is good. Our training is you see it and you do it.
Tell you, that's a
And then
long
go
time,
back to your
7 days.
Neighborhood and teach it. It's crawl, walk, run. And so start crawling.
Yeah.
No way, Tricky. That sounds really cool.
One thing I want to talk about.
I'm coming to where you're hiding.
And this is just where my mind goes. If communication goes down, power's going next. That's typically how those two things go. So, when you're talking about bugging out, and remind me, I'll also talk about a story from South Africa. When you talk about bugging out, understand this, that if for the first couple of days communication's not going on and you can't make payments, and you're still going to have things like traffic movement, you're still going to have traffic accidents. Well, if that system isn't running correctly and the wreckers aren't going out and removing anything because they're not getting paid, right? What happens to the highways and the interstates? How bad does that traffic jam look? Because you're going to have a lot of people with a lot of mindset to get out of the city, and they're all going to probably flee once they start seeing everyone else flee. That's how people move, right? So you need to have that contingency. Do I have a map of my area? Do I know how to get out of my area through all the back roads without hitting the interstate, without hitting the highway? Because most likely as well, that's also where the piratism, which happens all around the world, even here in America, that's where that's going to occur. But don't think it won't also occur on the farm to market roads. So, with mobilization and bugging out, you got to have prepared items already. All right. You got to have prepared items already. You have at least had to have planned and practiced the plan of bugging out, which means you also have to have that location to go to. Here's one thing. If you don't have a location to go to because you cannot buy anything, one of the things that I would put on my landmark is a national park. National parks are going to have bathrooms, they're going to have water well hookups, and maybe people won't be thinking about that. But if everything else has gone to shit, I'm going to the national park if I don't have a place to go, right? I have places that I could go. I have 3 or 4 different locations that I would go to. But I have to plan out in my mind, how severe is it? How severe is trying to go through Fort Worth and Dallas or some of the other larger cities? And then do I decide, do I want to take the best practical approach and go to the bug out location that's the furthest away? Or do I want to stay put? Or do I want to go to the bug out location that's closest to me that might not be the most adequate, but it gets me out of direct harm's way, right? So here's a story about South Africa. A good friend of mine from South Africa, he told me a story about his neighborhood. And this happened, gosh, I want to say at least 4 years ago. And sitting in his neighborhood, they were getting attacked quite frequently a month by the Afrikaners, however they say it. And it turned into a black versus white thing in South Africa. And so you had, like white settlements, white suburbs, I guess you could say, and they were being attacked by the Africans. And for whatever political, racist reason, I really don't care. What I care about is the crime and action of violence that's happening. So they ended up having to create their own internal security. So that means they had to do their own civilian watch. They did have external security that was at the gate. That was an armed guard. But this guy, if I'm correct, they killed him. All right. And their suburb got attacked by if I'm correct, it was at least more than 30 people. They used small arms and also tools like machetes and hammers. So I want you to consider this. And this was spooky when he told me this. I had gotten my friend actually into 3-gun shooting. And so he had bought himself a really fancy Benelli shotgun. Guy's good with it too. He's doing 3-gun matches now, so good on him. And he told me that he walked outside. It's nighttime.
This guy's more interesting than his guest. I wish he'd just talk.
Right. So he walks outside. He looks down the road, and here's his car. He looks down the road. He sees just this huge group of people just ransacking, going from house to house, breaking into cars. And then all of a sudden, there's this guy that appears in the front yard.
Yay.
And he has like a hammer, like a claw hammer or a machete is one of those tools. And the guy, my friend, takes his shotgun and points it at this guy. And it says, get off my lawn or I'm going to kill you. Guy didn't move, just sat there. And then he started to approach him. So here's some of the things that
he ain't going to Tricky's place as well, Chris. He's got a good hiding spot.
I'm going to teach you.
But coming to your place,
at
Tricky.
this training, because this freaked my buddy out really bad. He's like, I don't know what to do. I don't want to kill the guy. Who really wants to kill people, right? So I said, I get that, but this is where training comes out. Bad people will know to call your bluff. because the average bad person knows that the average good person doesn't want to kill anybody. So they will push that boundary as far as they can go, which means they'll come right to your doorstep, standing in front of you in that shotgun, and most likely will still demobilize you because of hesitation. In law enforcement, we teach that hesitation is what kills most officers, and sadly, that's true. So with the training that we're going to be doing, we're going to be putting you in scenarios where you are going to have to think.
Just make sure you got plenty of beer, Tricky.
Which is what you're not going to get on a flat range shooting at target paper, right? That's the unique thing about our training. And from there, you can learn many different skills, not just de-escalation, but how to actually deal with somebody if they start to cooperate. You know, I have seen this done before, Steve, where there's a problem between two people, and the one guy that's armed, who's that guy, his only solution is to pull his gun out and point his gun at somebody and say, stop doing what you're doing or I'm going to shoot. Because he doesn't know de-escalation. He doesn't know training himself. He's scared. He's anxious, but he's got a gun. He's going to use it. Well, that's not always the most, viable situation to be put in. That's not always the most correct response, especially if, and you got to remember, if this communication goes down for just a couple days and it comes back on and everything's hunky-dory and you killed somebody in between A and Z, you are going to be criminally liable. Just because the power goes out for a day or two and it freaks everybody out and then it comes back on, what do you do after that? These are things that I challenge a lot of, quote, preppers. And they don't have good answers for me because they don't think past that. They just think, I've seen Doomsday Prepper on Discovery Channel. I've watched every episode. And if anything happens that hits my Doomsday list, I'm going to my bug out location, my bunker, and I'm going to stay there until Jesus comes back. Like that's not intelligent. That's
Be good if we could do that, though.
Because people are going to come visit you. People will find you. And eventually you'll have to go outside.
Yeah.
And you'll have to communicate with people eventually.
And there's going to be roving mobs of people looking for other things. It's going to be really hectic.
If you don't know how to do that, you're going to be in a world of hurt. Because criminals know how to communicate. They know how to get belt buckle close to you. So let me put you in this situation, Steve. And I know I always do this to you. You're driving home. You're in your mountain property. You're driving back home. Comms are down. Electricity's down. And you have a bunch of guys sitting on the road with their guns. All right. Stopping your movement, your freedom of travel in your vehicle. What would be some of the things that you would be doing immediately?
Okay, so I'm on my way home and it's a roadblock.
Yep.
They're blocking the road.
Yep.
I'm gonna hope.
And Diane, the latest Mad Max one, what they were after was the pure blood, like the pure bloodlines. They were kidnapping people and putting drips in them and taking their blood off them. And there was a big piece of graffiti on the back of this rock that said, "Who killed the world?" That was Mad Max Fury Lane, I think it was about 2 years ago. Tom Hardy.
Plan would be, I observe it.
It was hectic, wasn't it, Di? I liked it.
And just continue to observe and try to assess, what's going on. I mean, if I'm aware, if
Diane, do you remember that graffiti in the cave? Who killed the world? Because everyone was just running amok. Very telling.
Communication is down. If we're already in the beginning of some chaotic circumstance, then I'm going to assess that pretty, differently. That okay, this is probably not going to go well. I probably am not going to be able to negotiate my way through here if chaos is already stopping. These people are probably not they're not constrained. They have little constraint, therefore they're willing to do whatever they need to do to achieve their objective. They're not really worried about what's going to happen to them if they take a
Will Smith.
destructive course of action, something that's going to be destructive to me,
I was going to say Liberace.
my property, whatever. So I would stop and observe.
Let me evolve the situation.
If I have an alternate route, I'm going to turn around and go access my property a different way.
Mm-hmm.
If I don't have an alternate route and I need to get, and I'm going home, then I'm going to go ahead and approach them, but then I'll be in a state of readiness, situational awareness that, okay, lower my window a little bit to communicate to them, but I'm ready to throw it in. Actually, if they have the road blocked and I can't just plow through it, I need to be ready to go in reverse. And then if I gotta, hump it to my house, go park my car and go off road to my property, then I'll do that. But so I'm either, if I approach them and I can tell that they are bent on violence, and I am not going to be able to, communicate my way through this, then I'm going to be, for me personally, I'm going to be prepared to just kind of ram through it and get to where I'm going, because it's either I hurt them or they're going to hurt me. And so what were you going to add to it? You're going to develop.
Yeah, let's evolve this situation. And once again, this is scenario-based training, right? This stuff Steve's done and I've done. Kind of a Kim's game almost, I guess you could say. We're going to evolve the situation. Say you pulled up to this vehicle checkpoint, this roadblock, and you notice that at least, let's say there's 4 guys, at least 2 out of the 4 are neighbors that you quasi know, you've spoken to. And they realize who you are, you realize who they are. And so that kind of tampers things down, all right? You approach calmly, you were confident, you didn't have your gun hanging out your window. Even if all these guys were armed, you would want to still approach cautiously. Maybe you wouldn't want to approach at all. Maybe you would just want to turn around. But in this case, you pulled up, you recognized them, they recognized you, guns are all pointed at the deck now. What would be some of the information you would be asking them?
Okay, guys, what's going on? Why? See, if I don't know what's going on, if this is just kind of out of the blue, why are they doing this? There's, some catastrophe.
Matthew McConaughey, is that the guy who goes, what's he saying? Yeah, or something? Oh, yeah, or something? He was in, yeah, I think I know.
Catastrophic event has not happened, then okay, I need to gain situational awareness. You said I need to know who are they, what do they want, and what are they willing to do to get what they want. So if I know who some of them are.
That's Matthew McConaughey. That's that guy who's got the Texas drawl, isn't it? If that's him, he went to high school in my local high school here at Lake Haven. He was an exchange student when he was a kid, and he came out the Central Coast in Australia and spent a year here.
Then I need to find out okay, what do you guys want? You know, why do you have this roadblock? And so you give the appearance of being cooperative and non-threatening. You don't want to be threatening. You don't want to escalate the situation. You want to be calm. So you be pleasant. Ask them, hey, what's going on?
It's true, Talia. He did come out
happening?
here.
Is everything okay? And just see what the exchange is. And then the scenario needs to develop. I mean, you've got to see, what is their
Oh, you talking
response.
about that.
And,
Yeah.
if and you kind of need to observe who is who in that crowd, who's in charge, what's their demeanor, who's unpredictable. But essentially, you need to know who they are, what do they want, and then what are they willing to do to get what they want. So
this is a situation that I've been asked a few times. For people who live in various different types of properties, especially suburbs, I've been contacted by a few people who live in suburbs, and they said, we would be setting up vehicle checkpoints, and anyone who would come into the suburb or the ranch state that they live in, they'd be checking driver's license to make sure that they are actually there and they are who they say they are and going where they say they're going. And you have to consider that in certain ways, this is both proactive and reactive. It's proactive to think like this because if communication is down for a period of days, especially if the power is out, what's one of the first things that's going to be happening? Criminality is going to spike. Home invasion is going to spike. Theft is going to spike. Right? Violence is going to shoot.
That's already happening here. A lot of spikes in the childhood crime. There's a big crime rate of children in Queensland and Victoria. They're just running the muck of the night time.
Through the roof. And if you want to have situational awareness and security, you set up a vehicle checkpoint and you be friendly, right? You can have your guns out. You always have to be aware, though, that this is a 24/7 job, and whoever is standing guard has to be reliable. They can't be falling asleep. They can't be Joe Blow with a shotgun, because you don't want a hothead out there pointing his gun at every single person, because, hey, man, people sometimes don't like each other. You never know if it may be the two.
Yeah, Talia, that's him, Matthew McConaughey. Yeah, that's him.
Neighbors who don't like each other. One's in the car and one has the gun saying, who are you and where are you going from? Like, you know who I am.
It was in Lincoln Lawyer as well.
Alone. Let me get to my house. I won't kick your dog this time. But these incidents will occur. People will think like that. And if you're trying to bug out to your bug out location, you may come through one of these checkpoints where you may be up there in the mountains where Steve is, and it could be a bunch of good old boys who's decided, we're not letting any city slickers coming through here. We don't want anyone robbing the place, so we know everybody on the mountain. And if you ain't on the mountain, you ain't coming in.
That's how it'll be. Yep.
Especially if you're in a very off-grid like situation. These are scenarios that people need to start playing around with in their minds. How would I respond? I get too many people who ask me, Doug, what type of flashlight do I need, and backpack and shoes and guns? And look, that is irrelevant. You should have that already. You should know what to do with all that. What you need to start learning how to do is how to deal with people in stressful situations and keeping your cool. Because that's how everything implodes, is when people don't know what the hell they're doing. And then you always have that one guy who just has to be in charge, but should never be given any type of supervisory position. And you have to be able to make bygones with people. You're going to have instances where, you know, you're going to have to compromise a little bit for peace and safety. You're going to have to compromise. I'm going to have to go through this rigmarole of standing post with Steve, who's the most annoying guy I've ever met in my life. But we're going to get through it. It's just, you know, 12 hours, right? So these are things I think that the regular civilian has a very big disadvantage at. Because in the military, we had to deal with that. You know, we had to stand guard with people that we either like or don't like. We've had to deal with stressful situations, the surprise inspections, the surprise training event where, you know, the gunny decides on today's vehicle checkpoint at 2:30 in the morning, he's going to blast his Humvee right through and see what you do, right? You get tested like that all the time, and you're being evaluated. Civilians are never tested. They're never evaluated. So when they're thrusted into this situation, they're at the biggest disadvantage. So that's one of the things I would tell people is that if you do have your bug out group, you need to you can put it on a whiteboard. All right. This is the scenario. This is what's going on. And say, Steve, you're up. What would you do if this happened? Okay. But you have to challenge yourself and you have to be honest. And that doesn't mean you pick on your buddy because he made the wrong decision. We're here to help each other, right? If you're safe and I'm safe and, you know, we're all prospering, then we're good to go. But if we start, you know, going after each other, well, then you create animosity. And the stressful time, we need the least amount of that as possible. Steve, we got about 5 minutes left. Spiritually, what's going on in America is very disturbing. And you and I were talking about, you know, the need to have physical preparedness, but the even greater need to have spiritual preparedness. And I just want to hear your thoughts on it. Where do you think spiritual preparedness, what do you think that means to you? And how, you know, what's your advice for the person who's struggling right now? You know, spiritually, what should they be doing to help better themselves?
You know, actually, that's incredibly wise, and it's the foundation. It's the most relevant thing from my perspective to preparedness, to being prepared, is that the security of knowing where your hope lies, where your strength lies. So for me, I mean, it is my, you know, it's my foundation that I can trust God to guide me. So for me, it's Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. Trust God with your
This guy has got Will Ferrell's eyes. I can see that, Tricky.
whole heart. Lean not on your own understanding. Acknowledge him in all your ways, and he will direct your paths. So as we are talking about all of these challenging circumstances,
Yeah, I was wondering why he needed bolt cutters.
I mean, not just the challenge of what the world is going to throw at us, but how am I to react to it? What is my reaction going to be? What knowledge do I bring to that, you know, life circumstance, you know, of whatever chaos is
Yeah, we call them bolt cutters too.
coming from the world. Peace comes from knowing that I can trust God and he's going to guide me and direct me. And so it is having that relationship, having that personal relationship that is a daily practice. So in the same way that we want to be prepared and, you know, prepared for whatever adversity, having food, water, shelter, and security, just knowing that ultimately your greatest security and your greatest hope is by walking daily close to God. So spending time with God every day, because my thought has always been, okay, just like our earthly relationship, if I am spending time with my dad, my physical dad every day, and if my dad has the ability, especially if I'm a little child and my dad can protect me and my dad can give me wisdom and my dad can tell me what I need to know to get through whatever circumstance, and my dad loves me, is there any chance that I'm going to miss that critical information that my dad wants to impart to me if I'm spending time with him every day and I am saying, Dad, teach me, show me what I need to do, and then if you do spend that.
What the heck is he talking about? Talking about his dad. What's he talking about?
Time daily, then God is going to direct you. He's going to communicate to you what you need in order to be successful and to survive. So, for me, that is the most critical piece: is walk close to your God, your heavenly Father, to know what His will is, and to know when He's directing you in a certain direction. And it's a promise. Trust Him with your whole heart. We don't have to lean on our own understanding. So we don't have to have all the answers. God will direct our paths. Acknowledge Him in all your ways, and He's going to guide us. So, even to me, it's, people listening to this program. Okay, God is speaking to you. For whatever reason, you tuned in, God is speaking to you.
Yeah, he come back with the father, Tricky. That's what he was doing. I'm sorry to hear that.
Stay in tune to Him, and He will reveal what it is, that you're to take away from this communication. More from Doug. I feel very inadequate in this
Yeah.
scenario. You are strong. This is not my strength. Communicating off the cuff just spontaneously like this is not necessarily my gift, but God nonetheless.
That's sort of true, isn't it, guys? We all know what we can do. We already know what we can do.
Can use us. But people you need to be seeking God with your whole heart, trusting Him with your whole heart, and He will guide, your steps and direct your paths. So, to me, and same, we're all in the same boat. The people listening are in the same boat that you and I are, because we need to know, God, what is it I need to do to be prepared, because I don't know what's coming down. I can speculate, but I don't know, and I don't know how it's going to come down. I don't know who I'm going to have to confront in the process. As you were just sharing what you just shared, and hopefully I can spit this out quickly to not go over the 5 minutes. But people, one really valuable tool is how to react to confrontation. It doesn't have to be violent or negative confrontation, but how do you respond when somebody asks you a question?
Yeah.
What information should you give them? How much information is enough? How much, what information is too much? So there are skills, and there are skills that we plan on sharing in the training in June. Some of that is just the ability to communicate when you're confronted by somebody and they're saying, what are you doing here? Where are you going? Okay, well, what's the wisest information? How much information should you give them? You need to actually gain situational awareness pretty quickly to determine, how should I respond? And there are techniques to responding, maybe you want to be ambiguous. Maybe you want to be misleading. Maybe you just want to give them a little bit of the truth. You don't want to just lay it all out there. So, I think it's important to practice being prepared to deal with people challenging you. Hey, who are you? Why are you here? What do you believe? Be prepared. How do you deal with that circumstance? But the most critical piece is be securely in a secure relationship with God so that you can have peace in that situation, and you will have the Holy Spirit guiding you.
Yeah, I think that's great.
Yep.
I think salvation in Jesus is the first step to the survival mindset.
Yep.
It should be. It should be the foundation, the cornerstone of your survival mindset.
Yep.
Should be salvation in Christ first. And then we can get onto all the night vision and thermals and, machine guns.
100% right. I like this guy.
But you need to be rooted in the Bible first.
100%.
I just want to read real quick. This is my daily devotional from Pastor David Wilkerson. At the very end, for March 23rd, at the very end of it, it says, God has determined to accomplish his goal on earth through men and women with weaknesses, as it is written of Abraham, who had many weaknesses but had faith. He believed God, and it was accounted to him for righteousness. That's Romans 4:3. So, have faith with what you're doing, and have faith with God. And that doesn't mean that you went and got dunked in the tank at your Baptist church and everything's fine now, I'll go to heaven. You need to continue that faith, as Steve was saying. You need to continue that relationship with the Father all the time. I found myself to be speaking to God as much as possible now.
Mm-hmm.
My Father is now passed on, and so my Heavenly Father is now my guiding spirit. Right?
Amen.
That's where I have to go to.
Yep.
For all my questions at this point. And I realize with the more that is happening around the world, the more my faith needs to be stronger. And I find sometimes my faith is inadequate. And a lot of times it's the enemy, right? The enemy telling you that you are inadequate. Your connection with God is not strong. But if you're hitting your knees every night and you are living a repenter's life, if your religion is giving to the poor and the sick and the widows and taking care of people, as Jesus said, you're doing the right things. And God will put you with the right people and lead you to the right groups. Some people, Steve, are not going to be prepared as they wish. And for that, they will have to rely on faith. And they have to hear God. And that means you need to hear God. You need to speak to God. You need to speak to God probably a little bit more than you watch YouTube all day or Facebook or Twitter. So that means you have to cut out a few things in your life, and you need to open up that communication line to the heavenlies. But yeah, ladies and gentlemen, that's all we got. Steve, thank you so much for being on with me, brother. I'll look forward to seeing you June 23rd. We will have the
Okay, I got another one of his, and it looks good. Hang on. The Next American Revolution with Christian filmmaker and historian. Same guy. American Vindictor Show.
Why do I shop at Peter Shearer Menswear? Because with a huge range.
April 19, 1775. That is when the redcoats came to confiscate arms from the American colonists, and the colonists said, no, they're not giving up their guns. So that led to a brief, almost battle. I guess it was kind of a battle at Lexington.
Skirmish.
I don't know.
More than anything else, but
I
shots
don't
were
know.
fired. Some people were killed. And then the redcoats went on to Concord, and the real battle, the serious battle, from what I understand, was at Concord Bridge. That's where you had a lot more redcoats killed, and you had people like Samuel Whitaker, the 80-year-old man who went out there and fought. Yeah, it was that was a shot heard round the world, as they say.
Wow.
What do you think the next shot heard around the world is? And before we go there, can you please introduce yourself to everybody in case they don't know who you are?
Sure. Well, I'm Chris Pinto, and I'm a documentary filmmaker normally. I make documentaries on the Bible, history, and world events. We have a ministry called Adullam Films, Adullam. It's named after the cave Adullam in the Old Testament, where David fled to when he was being persecuted by King Saul. And he and his mighty men hid out in the cave Adullam, and then they went forth and fought the good fight against the enemies of Israel. And so we've always thought that was a very beautiful picture of the Lord Jesus Christ. And so we fight the good fight of faith through our work in film and video production. I've also got a radio program called Noise of Thunder Radio at our website, noiseofthunderradio.com.
Man, I'm telling you, some of the work that you're doing is going to be some of the most important stuff that people have ever seen, because we are perishing because of a lack of knowledge. And I think a lot of that lack of knowledge is of history. And you and I are both students of history. And so, thank you once again for.
No, I was talking to Mum. Mum was asking me something. That's why I was shouting.
Your work, for what you do, because I've enjoyed the films that you've sent me. I think we need to move on before we get too deep into this. We were going back and forth about China, Russia, Civil War, and you'd asked me some questions, and to be influenced by this anniversary of the shot heard around the world. It's also the day that the Oklahoma City bombing happened.
Right. It's also the day that the siege at Waco happened. That's another one.
Mm-hmm. And what is it? Hitler's birthday today or tomorrow?
I don't know. Somewhere in April. I can't remember what it is, but it is in the month of April.
Yeah, this is quite the month to be having. I think the next shot heard around the world.
Okay, this is a month old, guys.
Is going to be the second revolution in America. And I think we're going to see a lot of repeats of history.
Oh, okay.
And by that, let me set the stage. This is what you and I were talking about earlier. You had asked me what do I think is eventually going to happen. Well, this is what I just got done talking about on the latest Doug and Dave Intel report with Dave Hodges of the Common Sense Show. And there, I said that I think China and Russia are going to bring forth allegations and evidence of nefarious operations from the United States government. Torture sites, the black sites, the interrogation sites, false flags that we've caused, like what I believe 9/11 was. Also, the ecological disaster that's going to be soon to be known, very, very well known, because of Nord Stream pipeline. I think there's going to be a lot coming out about the spying that's being done by America on other governments. And today, and I'll insert the video here, but today you had the Mexican president who said that he is going to have a security briefing with the defense secretary and with the secretary of the Navy over the spying from the Pentagon on their government and also from the DEA. We're going to take care of the information of the Secretariat of the Navy and the Secretariat of Defense. because we are being spied on by the Pentagon.
Wow.
And many media outlets in Mexico are leaking information provided by the DEA. Well, we've already pushed them away into the hands of the BRICS nations. That's probably not going to be a very good thing in our near future. And then also you have Saudi Arabia, who's now joining the BRICS nations. And so you can expect a false flag to happen in Saudi Arabia as a vengeance. That's what America does best.
Yeah.
So I think along with that, you're going to have a lot more evidence of spying, child trafficking, child sex trafficking, drug running by the CIA, who is involved in almost everything we're talking about right now. Embezzlement, showing how many different politicians and other high-ranking people in America have been bought off. And I mean, it would take almost nothing for China to show the receipts and documents of Hunter's visits and the $30 million that they've sent to his family. The same thing for Russia. Marjorie Taylor Greene today has announced that she has proof that there's an LLC company that Hunter owned that was used to pay off the prostitutes. And in there, it says that it was a sex trafficking ring.
Wow.
So how much more evidence do they need? Well, I think they can come up with quite a bit. I think they may even drum up what Gaddafi said and what Saddam said about wanting to go to the dinar.
Chris, they're giving Ukraine billions while you got actual cities with heaps of homeless. You got 10 cities in America, yet you're sending billions of dollars to Ukraine. What a
And
rule.
to get away from the petrol dollar. I mean, after all, that's why we saw, and he died.
The petrodollar's conquered. It's gone.
So says Hillary Clinton.
Gaddafi's
So I
out.
think, go ahead.
And can I throw in one question? Because I agree with what you're saying about this. It's like this unfolding of information to discredit the government of the United States is what it sounds like you're saying. And with this, as you know, they have been talking recently, and like in the mainstream, people like Tucker Carlson, Megyn Kelly, RFK Jr., Ron Paul have been coming out and admitting that the CIA was.
Diane, Australia signed over sovereignty to the World Health Organization. They've got the power to come in and do what they want if there's a pandemic.
Responsible for the assassination of John F. Kennedy. So my question to you is, as I'm listening to this, and I'm wondering, why are they, because it's almost like the deep state wants this information to be published. You see what I'm saying? Is that what you're getting at ultimately?
I think there's multiple efforts of multiple agendas going on, but the main goal is America must die.
Okay.
America cannot be part of this playing field anymore. And I will say this, maybe a little haughty and humorous when I say this, but there is no fighting man in the world like the American fighting man. We are the best trained. We are the best equipped.
That last link won't open, Diane. I just tried to open it and said Safari hasn't got the page.
And the best skilled for any war on any field on any continent. You could not defeat us. Multiple countries can. But if you spread us thin, if you give us a death by 1,000 cuts, then we can be weakened.
Yeah.
And with all these cuts comes festering wounds. And that is your protesting, your rioting. That is your civil wars.
Black Lives Matter.
After the civil wars have broken down. That will be also when we have no economy anymore. One of my projections is that I think eventually, probably, and I'm being cautious when I say this, but sometimes, screw it, caution to the wind. I think soon you're going to have a super majority party that is going to be completely socialist, communist.
Tell you, because they're all in on it. They're all satanic worshippers. They're all Freemasons and that. And it's really sad that Australia's done that, but we have. I've got to admit it. We signed over sovereignty to the World Health Organization.
And that will be the next
We were one of the most locked down countries in the world when that COVID hit.
front runner for the next election. Now, I say that because everything is going in this direction, that the Republic has died, that our government killed the Republic a long time ago. America has become the #1 world threat to stability and to freedom and to economies, because this is a world war is really more about a world economy fight than anything else. So America is the #1 antagonist for all that. It's not Russia. It's not China. It's America. Europe and China are just trying to catch up to us. And because of people like Joe Biden, they have caught up to us. What they did to Donald Trump for 4 years allowed them to catch up to us.
Now, when you say America, you mean the federal government, the deep state, the CIA, obviously not the American people, generally.
Okay. Okay, look, boy.
What's going on out there, but you're talking about the deep state, the political corruption that emanates from Washington, D.C. That's what I mean. And I agree with you 100%. But I think it's important that we tell the people of the world and acknowledge to our fellow countrymen, the average American does not agree with all of this evil that's going on. Most Americans, I think you know, Doug, most Americans do not agree with the vast majority of this wicked, evil, abominable corruption that is being pushed on the American people. Americans have been trying to figure out for decades how to throw off this evil Marxist movement in our country. Wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely. Well, you know, I would dare say that 80 to 90% of most Iraqis just wanted to smoke their Miami cigarettes and drink their spiced chai and watch reruns of, you know, Dallas Cowboy Wonder Days when they were winning the championships. Because that's all they did when we were there. If we weren't kicking their doors down, trying to find bad guys everywhere, creating bad guys. See, this is part of the, this is a very much a psychological war with many physical attributes to it. And this war is already working more in the communist.
Yeah, Diane, it did open. US is in the same boat as us.
Favor in America than it is in the Patriots' favor. And it doesn't, we have a supermajority of Americans who don't agree with this nonsense, who want to be conservative, Christian, isolationist. But your government says you can't be an isolationist. And then your politicians say you can't be an isolationist. And then your mainstream media mouths it. You can't be an isolationist. We have to be a part of the world. Well, we don't. There are many countries who are not part of the world. And
we three countries, the US, the UK, and Australia, we'd be the three biggest bastions of the West, wouldn't we? Throw in Canada, maybe, and we'd be the three biggest bastions of the West.
Thrive just fine. But with America, we have meddled so much in everybody's business that we kind of forget when you're the drunk guy at the bar and you just knock into everybody, and then finally you have the one guy who says, all right, I'm done with this dude, and he goes over and flattens you, and no one comes to stop you when the boots come to the face. Well, that's because you kind of earned it.
Yep,
you
amen.
Bumped into everybody.
I like this guy.
We have military bases.
I like this guy.
400 or more military bases around the world.
Actually, there's 800. There's not 400. There's 800 military bases around the world.
Imagine what we would say if China had or Russia had 400 military bases around the world.
Well, I understand what you're saying. Here's where I would not agree with you. Because part of the reason why we have all these military bases and part of the reason why all this corruption is going on is because of how our country is being manipulated by foreign powers,
Absolutely.
by the European Union, by the World Economic Forum, by the United Nations, by the Vatican. You and I have been talking a good bit about, in fact, the next documentary that we're getting ready to produce on American Jesuits talks about how the role of the Jesuit order, the Jesuits that are themselves an intelligence network, and they're said to be the most advanced and sophisticated intelligence network in the world. And as I told you, that's according to our own CIA. That's according to people like E. Howard Hunt. There's another quote from George H.W. Bush, who was a former head of the CIA, said basically the same thing. But these are the people who are manipulating our deep state through Georgetown University. But the average American is not aware of this. And so we've got these internationalist powers that are using America. They're using our country, our economy. I mean, how did China become a superpower? China became a superpower because we had communists in this country through Rockefeller, Ford, Carnegie, who manipulated the trade. This is part of the reason they hated Trump, because Trump exposed the fact that all these trade deals with China worked really one way. You pick something up that you own in your house, it probably says made in China on it. And that is how China was built into a superpower, on American money.
Hey, good, Mike. Good to see you.
Reliant upon all of this stuff manufactured in that part of the world. That stuff could have been manufactured right here in the USA, and that could have profited Americans. But instead, they worked out distribution deals so that we buy from China, and that allows China to just make an absolute fortune. We, the American taxpayer and consumer, basically built China.
So did we. We sold a lot of companies to China offshore in the 80s. We lost a lot of companies that went to China to do their business.
Modern China, I would say. If you look at where China was back in the early 20th century, 1915, 16, 17, right around there, they were still living in huts on dirt roads and things like that. They were very primitive. But the Rockefeller Foundation went over there and began to focus on the medical industry in China back in like 1917. You go look up the Rockefeller Foundation. Rockefeller is communist. They are flat out communists. The Ford Foundation are communists. Carnegie Endowment are communists. This was all exposed by our Congress back in the 1950s with what was called the Reese Committee under Congressman B. Carroll Reese. They discovered this plan of these tax-exempt foundations to try and systematically manipulate America into becoming a communist country. And they got into our schools, colleges, universities, and began rewriting our history books deliberately, and have been manipulating our country one step at a time in ways that Americans have been resisting, but we just haven't figured out what to do about this inner corruption in the deep state, in the education system. I mean, Christians are fighting against it's why so many Christians homeschool. It's why private Christian schools are built. Americans are doing whatever they can figure out to do to try and resist this evil movement. But that's the part of the puzzle that I think it's important to communicate, that it's not just America's been the bad guy. There's a reason why. It's almost like we have been a globalist baseball bat that the globalists, the internationalists, have used to go around trampling on different countries and different leaders who are getting in the way of this new world order that they are planning. Does that make sense?
Well, yeah, a lot of that happened on Jekyll Island.
Yes.
America, in my analysis of this, America was created more or less after the Industrial Revolution into the hammer of the world. Everything was given to us to become the most dominant, not just economical, but it more especially military nation of the world. We didn't have a military that could project itself on every single continent within 24 hours. Prior Korea. And then quickly after that, the military industrial complex quadrupled in size.
Wow.
It has with every war, but not just the military industrial complex, the intelligence community, the intelligence industrial complex. That is one of the things that
I did. Diana wants me to sign in and all that. So with Twitter, I haven't got a Twitter account. It wants me to sign in, and I can't. I need Gabe to help me do things like that.
and I firmly believe a lot of this can be linked back
And Gabe's gone down to see kids overnight.
to the Vatican. I blame the Holy See for quite a bit of things. And I mean, we have to identify right off the bat what we're talking about is Luciferianism and all of its workings, and then the rest of us who are just trying to survive, because that is the war. The war has always been that way, and especially against God's people. Notice they don't ban the name of Buddha. They don't ban Islam. They don't ban Scientology. They don't ban amphibians and make-believe characters of whatever it is they want to be. They ban the name of God and his son, Jesus.
Amen.
That is the most threatening, that's the most threatening power to the prince of this world. And so that's the real fight that we're in. But what we have to fight is all their minions, right? And I think what we see coming is this huge firestorm is what keeps coming to mind. There's going to be so many things happening simultaneously that the average stupid American who does nothing but play on TikTok all day will be so overwhelmed they're not going to go outside and participate in anything. And that word is called capitulation. And that's what the communists use because it goes along with fear. And I was describing this a while ago with Dave Hodges. And so dealing with the Mexican cartel,
Hey, John, good to see you, bro.
And other various stuff like this, is that by weaponizing fear, you can control masses of people. That's how the Nazis were able to convince their entire population to go along with it. It was peer pressure, which is a psychological weapon that is, very easily used against influential people. And then the other part of it was fear. Well, look what's happening.
No one says Buddha when they stub their toe. That's true, isn't it? Holy Ramadan, I just kicked my toe.
For right now.
Doesn't have the same
Look
ring.
at TikTok and Instagram and Facebook and Twitter. You have influencers. And if you don't agree with the influencers, then it's fear. If you don't agree with all the grotesque dismemberments of your children, then the government points its finger, its big finger down at you and says, we have legislative problems because you're not going to allow your child to do this, or you're not going to allow your child to date this man who's in his 40s and 50s, and you're denying him his love, because that'll be one of the next things. Pedophilia being legal, bestiality being legal. What I think with the cartels, though, is that they'll be the next weapon here in America. You can kill 1 million men and they'll write a history book about you. You can kill 100,000 men and they'll write military strategies about you and they'll teach about it in the war college. Kill 100 people, you're a serial killer. Kidnap 12 people, torture them to death, film it, send it to their families, the police, and the politicians, and put it on the internet, and you've now spread a plague of fear.
What the Buddha?
And all you have to do is see that convoy coming through, and people will stand down. That's what ISIS did. ISIS was not military-wise very good. They had a lot of people, they had a lot of equipment, but military-wise, they sucked. They could not stand up to even a battalion of Marines. There was no way. But what they were good at was propaganda and fear. And they were also communists. Just like the Iraqi army that we faced in Iraq. Saddam Hussein's all of his people, they were all communist.
So you're saying they weren't just radical? ISIS was not just radical Muslims. They had a Marxist worldview?
That's a great question. Let's see. We know the Pope's got a Marxist view.
Absolutely.
Wow. Let's take that back.
were also communists, just like the Iraqi army that we faced in Iraq. Saddam Hussein's all of his people, they were all communist.
No, so you're saying they weren't just radical. ISIS was not just radical Muslims. They had a Marxist worldview.
Absolutely.
Wow,
Absolutely to it.
That is very, very important. It seems to fit.
Donald Trump executed Senator McCain for creating ISIS, and if you want to know if that's true or not, the day after he died, a member of the Senate come on and said something about him being executed. Then his daughter was on The View, McCain's daughter, and she mentioned her dad, and she said, well, you can't kill him again. So they reckon McCain was killed for creating ISIS.
And with what so many researchers call the red-green axis, the fact that you've got the communists teaming up with the Muslims, the red being Marxism, the green being Islam, and if you trace their history, it goes back to the early part of the 20th century with World War I, when Germany was allied with the Ottoman Empire, the Muslims.
Yep.
And that's where that relationship seems to have begun.
Hitler did the same thing.
Yeah, no doubt.
After all the SS battalions started to grow in number, and a lot of people don't know this, 33 different countries donated troops.
All of them, Gigabyte. We
To
can mock
the
them all.
Nazi SS groups. 33 countries. Ukraine was the biggest.
Yeah.
Saudi Arabia gave their men there. And in fact, not only did Hitler, but his hierarchy actually liked the fact of having the Muslims there, because they said that they would kill without thinking. Well, the problem was the Germans would not, because the Germans were Catholic or Protestant. Most of them were Catholic, but they had a morality. The Muslims did not, which will be the same problem with the Chinese. They don't have a morality problem. Neither do the Mexican cartels. And all these elements, Chris, are already here in America.
Oh yeah, I mean, I've actually given presentations on this. I have an audio CD called what is it? Hitler's Jihad, the planned invasion of Islam in the West. Hitler, one of the things there's a quote from Adolf Hitler during that period, during the 1930s and 40s, where he talks about how the problem, he says, in Germany is that they got the wrong religion. And he says the problem is that they got Christianity, and that Islam, he said, would have been a much better religion for them
to do that. That's really well spotted.
For the purposes of world conquest. So Hitler actually lamented the fact that the Muslims were defeated by the Christians at the Battle of Tours.
Wow, I never knew this. Wow.
And he says if only the Muslims had won, they would have invaded all of Europe, and then we would have been Muslims. And you had many, I mean, there were tens of thousands of Muslims in Hitler's German army. There's a book that I recommend to people usually called Islam and Nazi Germany's War by David Modadel. People don't realize the strong connection between Nazi Germany and the Muslims. The Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, for example, al-Husseini, was a huge fan of Hitler. They were allies. Al-Husseini preached to the Muslim world, told them to support Hitler. You go online and you look this up, you'll find old black and white photos with Palestinian Muslim flags that say Palestina on it, and then have like the Nazi eagle with a swastika. They had the SS Handschar units that were Muslims. They wore the red fez.
I'm not making fun of Mary. I'm making fun of how the Catholics use her.
And they had the Nazi emblem with a scimitar, a curved sword. So the swastika and the curved sword on their lapel. That was part of their uniform. So these were part of Hitler's troops during the war. And you got video out there. If you go online, you look it up, you've got old film footage of Nazi soldiers, German soldiers like the SS and whatnot, bowing down and praying to Allah, the moon god of Islam.
And here's what no one really, I suppose people know this, but the Nazis, they fueled their blitzkrieg. They were all on meth. They were all on methamphetamines. Yeah, that's why they'll say blitzkrieg, because they were full of speed.
Many of the Nazis converted to Islam during and after the war. And there's quotes from them where they believed that the reason they lost was because of Christianity, because there were too many Christians behind the scenes who were like Dietrich Bonhoeffer, Sophie Scholl. She was Lutheran. She was a young girl who was just speaking out against the Nazis, and they put her to death for it, and others. And of course, Corrie ten Boom and her family, they were Christians trying to help protect and rescue many Jews from being sent to the camps and so on. But they believed that it was Christianity, just like you said, the morality of both Catholics and Protestants who could not reconcile their conscience to the evil and wicked
Final
things
solution,
the Nazis were doing. There's even a film that was made not long ago with Christopher Plummer called The Exception. If you've never seen it, I highly recommend it. Great film.
And Talia, you know what is scary? Apparently Russia's Gog, and Gog surrounds Israel, and it's got 40% Muslims in it, their army, Russia's army. That's not going to spell well for Israel.
But he plays Kaiser Wilhelm, who had been the leader of Germany prior to Hitler and before the Nazis came in. And he had been deposed, right? He was the Kaiser, though. And throughout the film, they're talking about the Nazis versus the traditional Christian values of Germany, that had been there for hundreds of years, both Protestant and Catholic, even though the Catholic side was, leaned towards socialism. But Protestantism went back to Luther, of course. So for hundreds of years. And you had Otto von Bismarck, and this is one of the things that we're going to be talking about in my next film on American Jesuits, because the Jesuits and socialism, the Jesuits are the co-authors of socialism. Most people don't realize this, but they helped develop socialism back in the 19th century with Karl Marx. And you've got a number of Christian writers who were warning about this back in the 1800s. A lot of people don't realize that. But it's why a lot of these Catholic countries like Mexico, Venezuela, Cuba, etc., have been given over to Marxism, because they've got basically the Vatican spy network in their countries,
the Jesuits,
undermining any kind of democratic process. There's the book Hitler's Pope by John Cornwell.
It's scary, isn't it, Talia? 40% of Russians' army are Muslims, and they don't mind killing.
Who was Catholic and a Cambridge scholar. And he wrote about how National Socialism was supported by the Vatican during the war. And when he was asked why would they support socialism rather than Catholic people, and he said because it was easier to control the population through socialism. And they feared Catholics and other Germans in a democratic process. They didn't want them to have the power to choose. You see what I'm saying? So socialism comes in like a harness that you would put on a horse or an ox or something to control it. And that's what they want. They want that for our country. They want that ultimately for the entire planet. We've seen what World Economic Forum is talking about there with their commercial that you'll own nothing, right? You'll pay rent and you'll be perfectly happy. You've seen that commercial, haven't you?
Yeah, you'll own nothing and love it.
Yeah, supposedly. Well, how are we going to own nothing? They're going to have to steal everything on planet Earth. They're basically going to have to confiscate all property. You see what I'm saying? So that's where things are headed. So globalism, as I tell people, if people in your audience haven't figured it out yet, globalism is essentially international communism. That's what it is.
You know, the Jesuits also, post World War II, were the ones who created all the rat lines.
That's
They
true.
created the rat lines for the Nazis to escape from Germany.
To go to Argentina, yep.
I can't remember. They'd bring them all the way down through Italy and other areas, and then they would ferry them off.
To Argentina and Brazil.
Identification and contacts in Brazil or Argentina, which was Catholic.
Right.
It is too. Wow.
And then out of nowhere, you have this new Nazi party in South America. You know, it's like, wow, how did that happen?
Yeah.
But that Nazi party persisted in America until the 1970s. And I still say to this day, this is my conspiracy theory. We are still dealing with the Nazis. I don't think they ever went away. I think they found a new hammer.
Operation Paperclip, he knows about that. You'd have to.
It was Germany. And then the experiment that was America defeated Germany and then defeated Japan. So how do you subvert
tricky
that?
amen, brother?
Use a little American flag, says made in China on it. You stage horrific killings, horrific natural disasters. You stage terrorism. And with the right amount of intelligence, you can fool people very easily. I mean, look at Building 7. There's still no explanation for that. But BBC reported Building 7, that it fell 7 to 9 seconds before it fell.
Yeah.
So what script were you reading off of, ma'am? And I believe firmly, and I've said this many times, people probably get tired of me saying it, but I'm creating currently my own documentation on some very nefarious operations that's been happening since the 40s to present. And I think post Operation Paperclip or Project Paperclip,
told you knew about
when we
it.
brought the Nazi elite, because that's who we brought over here, was the Nazi elite.
Yep.
When we brought them over here, they influenced everything. The CIA, the FBI, Department of Homeland Security, the Pentagon, your military industrial complex, your pharmaceutical industrial complex, your prison systems. We very quickly started to look like modern industrial day Germany because we brought over their people and we brought over their way of thinking, which was to immediately spy upon Americans, which was to immediately subvert the Constitution. That was the first thing, subvert the Constitution, spy upon Americans, turn people against each other, and then to experiment on people, and then capture politics. And I think their way of thinking, because let's just go ahead and combine socialism, communism, same thing, same problem. They were just the left side of the face of the Marxist problem. Communist is the right side of the face, the socialists are the left side, but they're all the same thing. And I think we're dealing with a lot of those problems today because this influence is spread around the world. But what do you make of now for one thing, of the mess that I just said, but what do you make of China and Russia now?
Well, I think our deep state controls China. I don't think China is really a threat to us because without us, there's no way they can sustain their superpower status. They need our economy. They need us buying all their made in China stuff. We're the ones who develop the technology. Then we send it to them and then they multiply it over and over again. That's not to say that China is not an advanced country. They are. In fact, I have a very good friend, the pastor of our church, I was talking to not long ago, and he was talking about being in China somewhere in the last 5 years and about how the technology there is very, very advanced. Like everywhere you go to the mall, you go to a hotel, you go anywhere, It's like they have this accelerated technology that's almost like technology in overdrive. So they're definitely pushing the envelope where that's concerned. But what has built them up, like I said, is largely the American economy. If our economy were to collapse, to who is China going to sell all of their stuff? You see what I'm saying? Who's going to buy all this made in China stuff? There's only so much you can do in Europe, and the Europeans are I think, more protective of their markets. But that would be the big question. Where's the cash cow going to come from to support this huge superpower and their 2 million man military? And that's a huge military to sustain financially. So I think our deep state controls China. Russia, I don't think we control Russia. I think Russia is more independent now. I think they were dependent on our economy under the Soviet Union, because the Soviet Union was built up by American money and money from Great Britain, during the war, during World War II, with a Lend-Lease program and so on. It's one of the reasons why Anthony Sutton wrote his book, The Best Enemies Money Can Buy. So, but I do think that I think that Putin is pushing back against NATO and globalism. I think that is real. But see, I see China as a proxy being used by American communists, American Marxists, through the deep state, through Rockefeller, Ford, etc., and George Soros. I believe and the Vatican, because the Vatican has openly said that they believe that the government of China is the most ideal government in the world.
Wow.
I mean, they've said words to that effect. Very, very disturbing, but they've openly admitted that. So why would they communicate things like that to 1 billion Catholics all over the world? Why would they tell them that? I think it's because they ultimately want to see somehow or other America reach that destination point. But the biggest obstacle in their way are Christians with their Bibles and their guns. I think that is obstacle number one, enemy number one. And I think, brother, that is the reason why we hear this grandstanding. I mean, I've heard it over and over and over again, especially since January 6th, which they've inflated. They've made a big deal out of it, even though most of what went on was people waving flags out in front of the Capitol. And there's still a lot of unanswered questions. You probably know more about this than I do, about how many were there federal agents involved stirring things up on January 6th?
Of course there was.
Instigating a lot of the agitation that happened there.
Yep.
But then in the aftermath, what they're saying is these statements that we've heard from Biden and others, that the number one threat, supposedly, to our republic are these right-wing MAGA people, are patriots, basically, people who believe in the Constitution of the United States. That's supposedly the number one enemy. And it makes me think of what a former FBI informant, Larry Grothwald, who had infiltrated one of these communist groups, the Weather Underground, back in the 1970s. And they talked about taking over America with communism.
Wow.
And that their number one enemy would be what they called the counter-revolution, which would be patriots, American patriots, who believe in freedom and the Constitution and who are not willing to go along with communism. You see what I'm saying? So
those are the ones that they said would have to be killed.
Yes, would have to be put in re-education camps. And back in 1970, according to Grothwald, he said they estimated they would have to kill about 25 million Americans.
Wow.
And anybody can go online and watch his interview. It's very disturbing, but the influence of the Weather Underground with William Ayers, and I think we've talked about this before, but that influence you see through the Clinton administration, you saw it through the Obama administration. In fact, Obama launched his political career in William Ayers' living room. And then all the way through Black Lives Matter, when these Black Lives Matter founders said that they were well-trained Marxists, the people who trained them were the people from the Weather Underground. They admitted that. And so they're still talking about these re-education camps. In fact, people can go online, they can look up Alan Dershowitz. And the reason I like pointing to somebody like that, Alan Dershowitz is very mainstream. People see him on Fox, they see him on CNN, they see him, he's a very mainstream guy, former Harvard professor. But he says at Harvard University, the students there were handing out a petition somewhere in the last year or so, trying to get people to sign on to agree to having re-education camps to round up Trump supporters and MAGA people and Republicans to re-educate them toward this left-wing type of thinking. Harvard University, the leading university in our country. And see, the people who graduate from Harvard, those are going to be the alpha males and the alpha females. Those are going to be the senators, the congressmen, the judges, the lawyers, the presidents, the heads of corporations, etc. They're going to be the vast majority of the leaders of the next generation.
That's the club that George Carlin talked about.
Yes. So it's very disturbing that these people are being conditioned to think this way.
Yeah. Well, you know, it makes me go back to my my thesis here about the hammer of the world. It was America, and now we are at the most depleted status we have ever been since after the Civil War. And I mean, they just had to raise body fat percentage standards for the Navy in order to be able to get new sailor recruits. I mean, most of the Navy was already fat to begin with, but you know, that's a little jab at them. And I think with the embrace of socialism with the younger generation, it's crazy to me.
Yep.
How many kids I've talked to at these protests and riots, or the ones that we've arrested and we've interviewed, they're all socialists. They're all Marxists. None of them can tell you anything else about it. None of them can tell you about the history of how many people, you know, that Mao Zedong killed. After 1934, the man completely disarmed after he got into rule. He armed his people, and then Japan was overthrown. And then what did he do immediately? Disarmed everybody in the 40s and started massacring them. Massacring. I mean, massacre is not the proper answer. It was genocide. And what they don't understand is that that's what's going to happen here in America, and you're going to be a part of that.
Yep.
Just like how we've been saying with Nazi Germany. How did you get the average German soldier who is of the ages of 17 to 25 to join into the Wehrmacht? Through education. Because Hitler said, if you want me to take over a nation, give me its youth. Give me its education. And that's the indoctrination. Well, is that not our schools? Is that not our colleges? And all of that, by the way, that's all appropriated now through government funds. So your senators and congressmen are the ones who fund it. They're the ones who grandstand for it. And they're also the ones who don't want women to be able to have their own sports anymore. So they're, you know, everything that these movements in America that built America, the feminist movement, you know, blacks being able to have equal rights as everybody else, all that is being subverted and hijacked now. Because now it's the anti-feminist amphibian movement. I have to be careful when I say these things. And then you have a rise of the Black Communist Party coming back. If anybody doesn't know anything about that, that is the Black Panthers. All right. Originally, and you can debate this amongst yourselves, were they good? Were they bad? They were infiltrated by the CIA and the FBI. That's regardless. That's a fact. That was COINTELPRO, Operation COINTELPRO, counterintelligence operation from the FBI. And at subsequent time was Operation Chaos from the CIA. And what they did was they infiltrated and subverted, and then immediately started to add aggressors into these civil rights movements. Well, that's what you see now. You were mentioning January 6th. Dozens of agents were there. I have a video of a Capitol Police special agent was there. And he says, yeah, you know, we got all this pepper spray flying everywhere, and I'm out there playing as if I'm Antifa. That's a strange use of words, Antifa. You should know better than that. You're wearing a body cam. So I think what we see with this new hammer of the world theory is that it was Germany, because Germany was at one point in time, 17th, 18th century, they were some of the strongest people within the European area, even to the point that the king was using the Hessians over here in America. They were great troops. But now,
the Holy Roman Emperor, through, you know, the whole idea of the Third Reich was, you know, had to do really with the Holy Roman Empire.
1,000-year reign, yep.
That's another Vatican Jesuit connection there, because Hitler had this concordat with Rome. He had a political agreement with Rome. Many people don't realize that it was the Vatican that had Jewish ghettos, had a Jewish ghetto in Rome for 300 years. It was only done away with in the year 1870. It was the popes who made Jews wear yellow badges to distinguish themselves. And that's where Hitler got the idea.
It was the popes.
A lot of people don't realize the history behind that. But you can, this is just basic history. It's just they don't teach it in our schools. So what the Holocaust was really a modern manifestation of the Great Inquisition, once you understand it. Just with modern technology and lots of cameras and photographs while it was happening. So that is very important to realize, because they haven't stopped. I just did a radio show a little while ago on the Rwanda genocide, because April, the month of April, is also the anniversary of the beginning of the Rwanda genocide, where they now report it was more than 1 million people who were killed. But you can go online and look up the role of the Vatican and the Catholic priests and nuns and so on in planning, orchestrating, and carrying out the mass murder of more than 800,000 people. And the methods that they used in Rwanda in terms of racial agitation, getting into the schools, teach racial hatred between the people. And they did this for decades prior to 1994. The methods that they used in Rwanda are almost identical to what they're doing here in our country. I mean, it's very, very disturbing once you begin to go and study it. And things like critical race theory and the 1619 Project, where they are literally trying to brainwash the kids in our school to hate one another, to have this racial enmity. And they're getting to the youth, just like you said, just like, you know, Hitler, get to the youth, and then we'll take control of the country. That's what they're trying to do.
You know, up in the Northwest, 2020, this was also the time where they discovered the mass graves of Native American kids up in Canada. That was all done in the Catholic area for the schools. Well, they had the same problem. What was that?
Scotland?
1800s. Down in California, Arizona, New Mexico, when the Spaniards still had that area of America. Well, guess who was there?
Yep.
That was the Catholics. Guess where the slave trade came from? It came from the priests.
Right.
And I don't know if you've ever seen the videos. I remember when I was in college for like history 201 or 301. We were watching the videos of the Catholic priests, and we were actually having to take evidentiary documentation of the amount of civil rights abuses, like applying that then with today's laws. How would you look at it? And I did some digging in, and man, the way they tortured kids, literally, if you didn't speak their language, they tortured them. Could not pray to anything else besides what they said. Couldn't have, it was a complete brainwashing, a rewriting of your entire childhood, it had to be everything that the Catholics said it had to be. And it was to get rid of the heathen problem. Well, it more or less is where you have now, what is it? The Mexican supremacist movement. Help me out here. I can't remember what it's called.
Is it La Raza?
La Raza.
Yeah.
Same thing. Same thing. You have within the communist movement, you have the black supremacists. Within the white movement, you have the white supremacists. That's all communists and socialists. Within the Hispanic culture with La Raza, that's the Hispanic supremacists. It's all communists and socialists. And then you had other subversive groups within the Arab culture, communists and socialists, Marxist. There's an equal thing amongst all of this, isn't there?
Oh yeah, and they want to.
Wasn't Franco from Spain? Wasn't he a socialist? Hitler's buddy.
Kill the gringo. That's one of the things about La Raza. They want to eliminate. See, I believe all this, and you and I were talking about this earlier. I believe all of this illegal immigration coming into our country, because now it's like they have opened the floodgates to bring in millions and millions of illegals in, and they're just rushing them in here. And now the Democrats have audaciously given them the right to vote, giving them the right to just to have the illegals vote. I mean, doesn't that qualify? You were in law enforcement. Doesn't this qualify at some level as just flat out treason against our country?
Yep.
It's subverting. It's absolutely subverting the Constitution and federal law. But you have politicians who will not say anything about it. On the left, they promote it. On the right, they do nothing about it except sit on their hands.
Right.
And then they complain afterwards. Oh, look at all the atrocity going on. But 5 Republicans going to the border is not going to change the threat to the south border. You know, but this has to be something that has to be captured fundamentally by the people, by the state governments. And if the state government doesn't do it, then the local governments have to do it. But then you have the element of prosecution and the fear of prosecution. Well, if I go and start putting Connex boxes on the border with concertina wire, who's going to stop me? Well, if the county approves it, then it would be the state that'll stop me. Well, go ahead. Send your state over here and come tear the Connex boxes down. No, we'll sue you in court for you not to do it. Okay, well, then we won't go to court. Have your marshals come and arrest the entire county. And then the standoff happens. But eventually, that element will occur. I'm not saying I want it to happen. I'm saying historically, those elements occur prior Civil War. Just like for the American Revolution, it was only, 100 people or so in the beginning who said, "Hey, we're not liking what old King George is doing anymore. We're going to start talking about it." And it was very unpopular. Chris, was it not? Very unpopular to talk against the crown.
Oh yeah, I mean, one of the things that has been kind of lost, I think, with growing up, from what I remember, you're given the impression that there was this kind of unity among the colonists in terms of opposing King George, and we forget about the Tories and the Loyalists. The Loyalists and the Tories were those who were loyal to King George, and they basically told the Patriots, quit complaining. He's the king. He can do whatever he wants. If he wants to confiscate your guns, just let him take your guns and don't argue. You see what I'm saying? And there were actually battles between patriots and these loyalists. And the loyalists were often spies. They were infiltrating the patriots. They wanted the patriots to lose. So there wasn't a complete unity in terms of all the colonists. You had that loyalist element. I think that's important for us to understand, because that's what we're dealing with today. I think many Americans are patriots who believe in our Constitution, but there is a treasonous left-wing element at work in the country that wants to burn the American flag, that wants to argue that the Constitution is racist somehow or other, and that argues that America should not even exist. I remember years ago, probably 20 odd years ago, there was a book.
Wow.
called The Planned Destruction
Diane, he did turn over the USA to Fauci, didn't he?
of
Wow.
America. That was the book by James Wardner. And when I saw the title, I thought, who would want to destroy America? Just didn't make any sense. Greatest country in the world. We have so much freedom, so many blessings. Why would anybody want to destroy America? And it took a number of years to figure out why these powers, which are really jealous of American freedom, jealous of the elitist powers in other parts of the world, the one thing they hate about America is that this has been a very successful country where we don't have to grovel at the feet of our leaders, where we have freedom, where people can imagine, they can pursue their dreams, they can invent, develop, and at the same time defend their individual rights. That's what they hate, because it's completely contrary to what the old world was. The old world, whether it was the Pope or the kings or the emperors and really anywhere in the world, whether it's Japan, China. Remember, the Japanese were still worshiping their emperor as though he was a god by the end of World War II. So this idea of leaders, whether it was Caesar or Pharaoh in Egypt, they were often worshipped as gods, and you didn't question them. They could do whatever they wanted. Mm-hmm. But now with the Reformation, with the Bible, with the realization that God says, I am God and there is none else. We ought to obey God rather than men. Let God be true and every man a liar, the Bible says. So, and nobody has the authority to openly resist or violate God's law and his commands. That's where the whole concept of God-given rights came from. But see, that's why I believe, and this is what I tried to show in my film, The True Christian History of America, where I go back to England and to Europe and so on and show the building blocks of argumentation for how our ancestors arrived at the principles of freedom that we have today: freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of conscience, etc., the right to bear arms, private property protections, all of those things that were taken from biblical principles. And that's something that we have lost, but that's why they're attacking Christianity. And I think it's also why they attack whiteness, so-called whiteness. It's not really about white people. It's more about the laws that have been articulated by our ancestors. Magna Carta, the English Bill of Rights, and the U.S. Constitution. You see what I'm saying? Those are restraints on the powers of...
Yeah, Diane, the voting doesn't count. I believe they ripped Trump off. I really do. I'm not a Trumper anymore. I was, but I reckon they ripped him off. So I don't think there's any honest elections anymore anywhere.
Tyranny, and prevent them from doing things like confiscating everybody's land. You can't do that. They're taking away, Doug, fundamental rights like self-defense. They're taking away fundamental self-defense. Have you seen that video of who's the Canadian Justin Trudeau? Justin Trudeau talking about owning firearms in Canada says, yes, you can own them for hunting, you can own them for target practice, but you cannot use a firearm for self-defense. So there was a guy who his home was broken in by a criminal who had a firearm, and the homeowner grabbed a firearm, defended himself, shot the guy, killed him. They charged the homeowner with first-degree murder.
No way!
Even though it was clearly self-defense. You see what I'm saying?
Wow. That's been happening here in America.
Oh, yeah.
Those cases are coming out. Even here in Texas now, the jury found the Army sergeant that was down here in Austin. Forgive me if I missed the names. But he was found guilty for killing a Air Force veteran who clearly had an AK-47 in the low ready position. I can't tell if his finger was on the trigger, but I know from my military training and law enforcement training, there's 3 ways to hold a gun. loose, where it's just hanging down on you, low ready, and high ready. The only difference between low ready,
Tricky, you have such an elegant touch with your language, brother.
is that eventually you pull up the gun to high ready, and that's how you fire, right? And this guy had the gun right there looking at his window. And so the Army vet, who's a driver, Uber driver, pulls out his revolver, kills the guy. Well, I mean, it's in the middle of a riot. You know, I mean, can you not fear for your life anymore? And in Texas, we have stand your ground. So then the defense says, oh, well, he purposely drove into that crowd. See, this is your problem with social media, ladies and gentlemen. You say stupid stuff on social media, and then they go back into the history machine and they find it, and they use it against you. And that's what happened to this guy. And they found him guilty. But Greg Abbott says that he's going to pardon him because it's ridiculous, stand your ground law. Well, now they're saying that they're going to riot in Austin. And this is what needs to happen eventually for this communist revolution actually takes over and not just gets the foothold. Local law enforcement has to start beating the shit out of people. That's what has to happen. The moment Antifa comes out, if you and the posse of your fellow citizens do not get together, it happened in Colorado, if you do not get together and push these people out, surround them, you have to arrest them, identify them, and not release them. That's how you take control of it. But the moment, because I dealt with this already, man, I've dealt with it too many times, where we have people that are using lethal force against us, but we can't use lethal force against them because of politics, until one of us catches on fire from a Molotov cocktail. And even then, they said, don't shoot into the crowd. You may not hit the right person. They're all the same people, guilty by association. I could recode the whole crowd, right? But if we don't attack aggressively the way they attack us aggressively, then we're going to capitulate, and they're going to take over, and then they're going to become the law enforcement.
Well, that you are hitting the nail right on the head. This is what I've been going over in my research here for the past.
Forgive me for swearing. Sorry.
Well, I think many Americans understand, definitely, because we definitely. I mean,
nah, Tricky, we love you as you are, mate. You make us laugh.
You've seen now this riot they just had in Chicago.
Yeah.
And this young woman who's getting beat up by the mob. Okay. And they start pounding on her, and then apparently they pounded on her girlfriend. And they're testifying afterwards that they were waving at the police, okay, that were driving down the road, got next to the police car, and the police just ignored them and drove on, like drove around them and ignored them. And they said the police will not help. The police will not protect them.
Stood down.
Yes.
Wow.
And this has been happening over and over and over again. And I know you've seen the case like in Uvalde, where the police stayed outside for an hour and wouldn't go in and risk their lives. And the courts have ruled for years now that the police have no legal responsibility to protect America.
It's called you do not have a duty to act. And the way our lawyers described it to us when we would have annual training, and we have to say it the silliest, most ridiculous way possible, but more or less, if they're...
A lot of the coppers in the USA are Freemasons as well. We all know that.
Was a school bus filled full of nuns, and then a school bus filled full of kittens collided together, and it's just a catastrophe across the highway. I don't have a duty to stop and render aid. I could just drive around, report it, and drive around. Now, where is that American? And no cop does that, by the way. No cop does that. See, and once again, they say, don't stop because we might get sued. Well, okay, but if I don't stop, then people might die. If I don't stop the arsonery, people may burn to death or die from smoke inhalation. If I don't stop them from breaking into this bank, then they'll break into the Starbucks and then to this store and to this store. And by the way, American citizens own all this. What does law enforcement protect? Do we protect you, the politicians, or do we protect we, the people? Who do we serve and protect? Law enforcement needs to identify that.
Yes, but I think most law enforcement, I think 99% of the police will protect the people and want to protect the people. What happened though with Antifa and Black Lives Matter, when these wild mobs are out burning everything down, is the politicians are telling the police to stand down.
So right there, this is the problem I dealt with in Portland. I personally dealt with this. We had to sit in a building and let it be caught on fire before we could go outside and effect arrests. And I'm the supervisor on scene, and I'm calling my supervisor. Yep, it's on fire. Is there smoke entering into the building? Yep, I'm looking at the door on fire right now. Okay, wait a little bit and then go. I mean, and that's no fault of my supervisor, but when do we stop taking orders from politicians? Politicians who are not only bought off by the Chinese and the communists, politicians who subvert the Constitution, politicians who allow criminals to be let loose because of their legislation.
Mm-hmm.
And then we sit back and we say, oh, hey, the mayor says, just let the city burn because he's the mayor. And I guess we work for him now. No, that's not how it works. If America was being attacked and the president said, sit on your hands, Pentagon, don't do anything, what do you think the Pentagon would do? They would defend, hopefully, right? They would defend, regardless of what he's...
No way, mate. I think you're very hopeful there. They want America to fall as well.
Yes. We all need to be on that same level, but we're not. We may get there one day, but it's going to take a tragedy.
Yeah, I fear you are correct. But I wanted to point this out because this is part of, I've been reading early American history. If you read the Declaration of Independence, one of the grievances against King George was they said he has abdicated government here in the colonies because he has declared the colonies outside of his protection. Okay? One of the things that King George was not doing was protecting the colonies according to the rule of law.
Oh.
And so they were doing things like stirring up the Indians, and the Indians would go and attack the colonists. They were trying to encourage slave uprisings. So they were instigating hostility against the colonists and then refusing to protect them and to protect their rights according to English common law. You see what I'm saying?
Wow.
And it's almost, I'm like reading about the principles, because they argued at the time the protection and obedience principle is reciprocal, that the government must protect and in return the people obey. But they argue that if the government will not protect, if they refuse to protect the people,
We don't
then
obey.
the people are absolved from any duty to obey. See what I'm saying?
Yeah.
What federal court that you can think of now would agree with you?
None.
Oh, they won't any
None.
more than the redcoats. You see what I'm saying? That's why we fought the American Revolution. So this argument was being made. Our forefathers said, hey, the king will not protect us according to the rule of law. We're not going to obey him anymore. And that led to the American Revolution. You see what I'm saying? So that's what I find, taking it back to our conversation about, are we headed for a civil war? I think when the government reaches this point where they're compromising the safety and the well-being of the people. Because look at what's being reported, Doug. I mean, they're saying that in 2022, over 100,000 U.S. citizens died from fentanyl poisoning brought in over the border. And the way it's being brought in, now I don't know if that number is true or not, I assume it is, but if that's true, 100,000 people in 1 year, that is absolutely catastrophic. We lost 58,000 men in Vietnam over 20 years. Think of the comparison.
And that's just one kind of drug.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's not even taking heroin or meth or any of that stuff into account. I mean, if the Mexican government were firing mustard gas bombs over our border and poisoning our population with mustard gas, and 100,000 people were dying, wouldn't we consider that an act of war?
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
That is what is so disturbing about what's happening right now.
Wow.
And I think, and we only have about 2 minutes left. I think this all revolves around money and control. Somebody's making a lot of money by keeping the border open, and they need to control that, which is the reason why I've almost given up on our electoral process. I think it is in shambles. It's a shame, and I don't think it's fixable. I think you have to have another revolution,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe even then it won't be fixed.
Too late for anything
Well,
to
it
get
depends
fixed.
on who, I've been studying what's happening in America alongside what happened in Rhodesia, what happened in South Africa, what happened in Rwanda, because the pattern's very similar. Especially when you factor in the racial agitation component, how they're using race as a political and cultural weapon. And the disturbing thing is they had a war in Rhodesia. They won every battle in the war, just like in Vietnam. We fought in Vietnam, we won every battle in Vietnam somehow, and then we lost the war. Okay, same thing happened in Rhodesia. They fought, they won every battle in Rhodesia, and then their country was still handed over to communism. Same thing happened in South Africa. They won every battle against the communists, and then their country was handed over anyway. So if we were to come to that point, it would all depend on how, if we were in a conflict, we would have to pay attention to the political conclusion of that conflict. You see what I'm saying? To make sure that the people who are negotiating the restoration, because what I think the American revolutionaries did, they were not fighting just to get rid of King George. They were fighting to restore the sacred principles that had been handed down in English law that were being taken away. Life, liberty, property, right to bear arms, private property ownership. These things were being compromised by the king. No taxation without representation, just fundamental principles that had been part of the legal standing of Englishmen for centuries. And so if there were going to be some kind of a conflict, hopefully it would be aimed at restoring our constitutional republic rather than something else. See, this is where I think the people get confused, because we're hearing those on the left say, oh, America was founded
I still got a bit of fight in me, Tricky. Don't worry about that, mate.
by these radicals. But they don't realize that really what the revolution was, it was more of a law enforcement type movement. It was the magistrates and the people saying, hey, King George keeps breaking the law. When he's taxing them contrary to Magna Carta, that was against the law. When he wanted to house troops in people's homes, that was a violation of the Petition of Right of 1628. You couldn't do that. When he came to confiscate arms at Lexington, that was a violation of the English Bill of Rights of 1689. Sorry. You see what I'm saying? He kept breaking the law. And so they said, okay, we're going to enforce these laws, and we're going to go after the people who are violating them, and we're going to restore our liberty and our protections. And that's what they did. But see, they were legally authorized to do that by the Great Charter of 1215, Article 61. But now what they've done is, because the real history has been taken away, people don't know the real history anymore. So they think that communists have right of revolution, that they can just revolt because they want free health care and free college and, taxpayer funded abortion, all this other kind of stuff. But see, that's not legal. What they're doing is a crime in our country. That they don't have a legitimate argument. The American Revolution, I believe, and I try to show this in my film, True Christian History, was based on legitimate arguments against the lawlessness of the crown and the redcoat government. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Now.
And we only got, we're out of time, but I'll give you one last minute. Let people know where they can find your films. And I want to invite you on for a part 2 of this. And let's go over your film. Let's get back into American history. Now let's talk about why it is important to understand American history, because it's going to be our future. If we don't stop it, America will be history.
And hopefully, Lord willing, that will not be the case. I love our country, and I'm thankful for, the more I study real American history, especially the Christian side of it.
The Puritans.
Cat, stop wrecking
And
the
the
laptop.
Puritans. Yeah, I love the Puritans. I think about what King David said to Solomon when David was on his deathbed. And
He's rocking the
Solomon,
laptop.
who becomes the new king. And he said, Solomon, my son, seek for and keep all the commandments of the Lord your God, that you may dwell in this good land and leave it as an inheritance for your children after you forever. That's God's promise. If we hearken to obey him, then we can dwell in the good land, and the Lord will bless us, and he'll bless our children and future generations. All right, so our website for our film company is adullamfilms.com, and that's ADULLAM films.com. And that's our main site where we have all of our documentaries. We've done about a dozen documentaries. We've got got a whole series on the history of America. We've got our History of the Bible series. We've got a series on prophecy. And then we've got a number of other documentaries that are typically based on the Bible, history, and world events. And then our radio program is Noise of Thunder Radio, which you can find at Noise of Thunder Radio.
Good night, Talia. Thanks for joining.
We're also on, if you go to Apple iTunes or SoundCloud, you'll find our programs there as well, if that's easier for you.
And I'll make sure that in the description, if you can shoot it over to me in the email, I'll put all that in there. Look.
Okay, guys, one more and then I'll hang up. This goes for an hour, though, so I'll be here for another hour. And it's Chris Pinto interview. The Jesuits and the Vatican want to destabilize. I can't see the rest of it. So now we're getting mad.
Hi, come through.
World of our generations of what the past really was like, so that we don't repeat it and it become our near future. But unfortunately, it appears that choice has been made for us. At least that's my dire opinion. So Chris, thank you very much for coming on. Sorry I got to cut it short, but we'll have you back on, and I'll be traveling down south, God willing, May 11th, to go and actually document this historic day, the ending of
2 weeks old, guys. It's only 2 weeks old.
Title 42, and to see the madness that's going on the border. And if you and I are lucky, we may catch up down there and really see what's going on.
I know. I'm trying to figure out if I can. In fact, I'm already making some arrangements and calculations so I can meet you down, not on the 11th, but hopefully sometime afterward, before the 8th.
Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, what's going on the border is very serious, and it can actually change the impact of your way of life. And that is what these people from the New World Order, I don't care what you label them, that is the goal, is to completely circumvent everything from the Constitution and to turn this country into a socialist, communist country. That's why we have socialists and communists now in Congress. So, God forbid. Ladies and gentlemen, that's all we got right now. My name is Doug Ford. This is Chris Pinto.
Oh, right. I would already watched a bit of this. Hang on.
World.
circumstances that have led up to the mass migration, immigration, invasion of America, as you would say. And we're
Okay,
going to
Tricky.
talk
Good
about the
night, mate.
repercussions of everything that goes
God
forward.
bless.
So, Chris, without further ado, thanks for being on the show. And you wanted to inform everybody about the, I guess you would say, secret mission from the Jesuits to invade America, if I'm correct, to invade America with mass migration that would cause chaos upon the people of America and our economy. Am I correct in saying that, or is there more to it?
Well, generally, I mean, there's certainly more to it. I would say, not just the Jesuits, but really the Vatican and the Catholic bishops, the hierarchy of Rome. I also think it's important to make the distinction, which I've heard made by other researchers many times over, that the average Catholic person does not support anything like this. So the average Catholic conservative in our country would not really support illegal immigration. But those who have these left-wing leanings towards socialism, just like anybody else, they tend to support it. But what I talk about on my radio program is the fact that this immigration warfare, which is what this is really called, goes back more than 100 years. Goes back to the late 19th century, where we were warned about this by a Catholic priest named Father Charles Chineke, who was a personal friend of Abraham Lincoln. He was actually a very famous man. I could just did a radio show talking about this, and Chineke, when he converted to Protestantism, he eventually became a Protestant, but that was news that made the front page of the New York Times back in 1858, I think the year was. So he was very famous. He was a Canadian Catholic priest. He was known for the temperance movement, where he was opposing alcoholism and people getting drunk and this kind of thing and ruining their lives over alcohol. But then he came to America. He was the founder of St. Anne, Illinois, the town, the city, the village of St. Anne, which is still there. And he became the close friend of Abraham Lincoln before Lincoln became famous, before he became president. And so he had this ongoing relationship with Lincoln, and then he went to visit him several times after he was in the White House. And he actually warned Lincoln that there were plots to assassinate him, to kill him. There's a whole series of books written about this. In fact, I've got a couple here. Well, the one by Chineke is called 50 Years in the Church of Rome. That's one. Another one, which that's probably the most famous one. Most people talk about that. But the one I like to tell people about, in addition to that, is this one, which is called Rome's Responsibility for the Assassination of Abraham Lincoln by General Thomas Maley Harris. General Harris was a Union general a brigadier general in the Union Army during the war, and he served under Abraham Lincoln. And he actually sat on the committee as one of the investigators investigating Lincoln's assassination. And he came to the same conclusion that Chineke did, and that is that the Vatican and Rome ultimately were responsible for the death of Lincoln, for the assassination. And that John Wilkes Booth and the other conspirators, they were all instruments, really, of the Vatican and the Jesuit order. The thing to remember about the Jesuits are that the Jesuits are an intelligence network. They're a spy network. They're like the CIA or the KGB. And that's not because I say so. Anybody could go online. If you were to go online and look up E. Howard Hunt.
Oh.
E. Howard Hunt was a very famous CIA agent during the Watergate era. And there's a documentary where E. Howard Hunt is being interviewed, and he's talking about the Catholic Church operating down with the CIA in Latin America after World War II. And he's talking about getting certain information from the Catholic hierarchy. And he says, we don't know how it is that the hierarchy gets their information. But he says, we've always said that the Jesuits form the most extensive intelligence network in the world.
I knew that.
Okay, so that's acknowledged. That's, I mean, if you look up E. Howard Hunt, he's one of the most famous CIA agents in the 20th century. But for him to say something like that, to acknowledge that, really just affirms what so many different history books would tell you about the order, that they are a network of spies, assassins, and they're involved in covert activities in our country and around the world. But anyway, one of the things that Chineke warned about in the 1800s was that the Catholic bishops met and they had a plan to try and get control of America through mass immigration by having all of these Catholic immigrants come from different countries. Ireland was the principal country back then, but other countries in Europe. And this warning, by the way, is well known. Anybody can look this up. If you just even look up on Wikipedia, not that it's the most reliable source, but whether that or any source on Charles Chineke, he was known for warning Americans that the Vatican was going to try and get control of this country and use mass immigration to do it. To use what they call in Rome irredentism. Irredentism. One of the people that I just interviewed for our upcoming documentary, Dr. Ronald Cook. And Dr. Cook is from Northern Ireland. And he's from the Ulster area in Northern Ireland. Now, if you look up the situation in Northern Ireland was Protestant for several hundred years, going back to the time of William and Mary in 1680s and 90s. And so it was predominantly Protestant, but the Vatican didn't like that because they didn't want these Protestant heretics in Ireland, because Pope wants all of Ireland to be Catholic. So in the 20th century, they began this movement to try and de-Protestantize or get rid of the English Protestants in Northern Ireland. So they started moving all of these Catholic immigrants into Northern Ireland to build up a Catholic population and then start demanding shared power with the Protestant government there. And that's what sparked all of the conflicts with what are called the Troubles, the bombings, the radical agitation. Give us the power we want, or we're going to blow stuff up and cause riots and all this other kind of stuff. Kind of like
the IRA.
Yeah, the IRA, exactly. And Dr. Ian Paisley, who was he was like the leading minister in that country for many years, for decades. He always said that the Jesuits were behind the IRA. That they were the ones who were ultimately provoking and promoting this whole movement. But when I interviewed Dr. Cook and I was asking him about immigration into America and, all of these Mexican Catholic immigrants coming in, I said, what do you think about this? And he said, what they are doing is just what they did in Northern Ireland. And he said they are using a method of warfare called irredentism. Irredentism, which is basically immigration warfare. You move a bunch of people into a country that you want to get control of, and then you use that foreign population to systematically take control of eventually everything.
If I'm correct, the IRA was communist, revolutionary communists. They believed in Marxism, Leninism. So
I never knew that. I never thought about what the IRA's actual political persuasion was, apart from getting power. I didn't know they were socialists.
They were then propped up by the Vatican. Would you say that the Vatican is also, I don't know if the word responsible is appropriate, but would you say that the Vatican then
played a part,
agrees to an extent with communism, helps the influencing of communism and the spread of it?
Oh yeah, there's no question, brother. No question at all. In fact, here in modern times, even though the Vatican has a reputation of supposedly opposing communism in the earlier part of the 20th century, in modern times, you've had official statements from Catholic leaders in Rome openly stating that the communist Chinese government is the most ideal form of government for the Catholic Church. They've openly said that. You can even find that headline on the news. But one of the things that we're going to show in our upcoming documentary on the history of Rome and Jesuitism in the United States is the development of socialism and communism in the 19th century, because a lot of people don't realize that even back then, it was the Jesuits who developed the term social justice through a Jesuit priest named Luigi Tamparelli in 1843. That's where the term social justice comes from. People hear it all the time, but they don't know its origin. If you
There'd
were
be
to go
something
to
behind
a
it,
dozen
Chris, you can bet
Jesuit
that.
websites, you'd see references to either social justice or justice this, justice that. They're even pushing now vaccine justice, trying to get everybody vaccinated around the globe. Okay, so that's their terminology. You also have then in the 1850s, the great Protestant leader of Germany, Otto von Bismarck, published in the newspapers back then that Karl Marx, who was still alive, was working with the Jesuit general, a guy named Peter von Bex, and that Marx and the Jesuits were basically working together to foment socialism in Europe. Now, because of that, Bismarck ends up throwing the Jesuits out of Germany. He expelled them. This is, again, this is not conspiracy theory, it's history. It's history they don't teach anybody in the schools. But anybody can find it out. You don't have to take my word for it. It's very well known, it's fully documented. There are also a number of books that were written back in the 19th century where you had Christian ministers who were warning, like J.A. Wiley in 1881, Wiley who wrote the great history of Protestantism back then. And he has a book called The Jesuits, Their Moral Maxims and Plots Against Kings, Princes, and Churches. And in that book, he says in 1881 that the Jesuits...
I'm pretty sure the Protestants just signed up with the Catholics about 3 or 4 months ago. So the Protestants have made up with the Catholics.
Which use communism as the weapon against countries they are trying to control. Okay? So this is in 1881. Prior to that, in 1860, you had Alexander Hislop, who was a very well-known minister. He wrote the book, The Two Babylons, which many people are familiar with. But he also had another book called The Red Republic. The Red Republic.
Interesting.
And in it, Hislop argued that the Jesuits and the papacy were developing socialism as a weapon against their enemies in the next generation. Now, of course, Hislop was big into teaching Bible prophecy, and so he relates the Vatican and the papacy and communism as being this scarlet-colored beast that shows up in the book of Revelation. You know, the woman riding the scarlet-colored beast, the woman being a picture of Rome manipulating this communist world empire.
And scarlet being the color red.
Exactly. And Hislop made no bones about drawing the analogy that communism, which is represented by the color red, that's the reason why. Because and when you study globalism is international communism. That's what it is.
Absolutely.
And so here you got Hislop back in 1860. Remember, communism hadn't taken over anything yet. It hadn't gotten control of a country yet. You see what I'm saying? Marx published the Communist Manifesto 1848. So here you are in the 1860s, you're probably less than 20 years later, and you have Christian ministers, God-fearing people, who are exercising discernment, and they're warning people. There's a whole variety of ministers. I'm going to show them all in this upcoming film, or well, maybe not all of them, but many of them, hopefully. But just present the quotes to people so they can see that we had churchmen warning about this probably 50 to 70 years before communism actually got control of places like Russia and China and then North Korea. And, you know, we've seen this wave of communist takeovers and revolutions in the 20th century. But what people don't realize, I think, is that the groundwork for that was being laid back in the 1800s.
So the mid 1800s, like 40s to 70s, 80s,
Right.
that's going to be American Revolution, or excuse me, American Civil War. That's going to be the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, which looking back in history, I say is probably one of the biggest downfalls of America. The biggest uplifts and also one of the biggest downfalls, because that's when we sold the Constitution to bankers. I think what you're saying here is an interesting correlation, especially when we say communism, because Chris, the problem with the word communism is that it's used so much that people don't actually understand what the rule of communism is. Communism, essentially, if you look back into old time Rome, that is recreating an empire. And the guy in charge, either the pharaoh or the emperor, that is the head president of every communist country, because he is de facto law and everybody else has to serve under him. And isn't it interesting that in South America, the amount of communist countries, to include Mexico as well, and to include Cuba, they're all communist countries and they're all Catholic countries?
Yes. Yeah.
That's very interesting.
Yeah, I've had two speakers that have drawn that. In fact, what was his name? Tim Kaufman, who's a former Catholic, now a Protestant evangelical. But he.
Chris, go back to the comment you left on that OzD code. I left you something else as well, brother. I left the link there for something else you might be interested in. So go to that comment you left on the OzD code, and I left it there.
Made that comment when I interviewed him. He said, you look at these countries that are being given over, like Venezuela, Cuba, these Latin American countries, they're being given over to socialism or communism at different levels. And yes, they're historically Catholic countries. And it's because the hierarchy basically controls those countries. And what we have to understand, I think, as English-speaking people,
Cat, stop rocking the
we have to
laptop.
understand that not all Catholics necessarily want their countries controlled by the Pope.
It's making the camera
And
rock.
historically, Magna Carta was written. If you get the book, Rome Behind the Great War by John Kensett, who founded the Protestant Truth Society back in the late 19th century, but he argued that Rome was behind World War I.
Wow.
And he goes over the history of the West and how King John, back in 1214 AD, went and he met with the Pope's ambassador, a guy named Pandulf, and he took the crown off his.
Wow, King John. And you guys were posting at the beginning of the stream, Trump's bloodline is connected to King John. No coincidences with God. Wow, that was crazy.
Dead, and he laid the crown at the feet of the Pope's ambassador, basically saying that the Pope will be able to control England through King John. Well, word of this got back to the leaders, the barons in England, and they were Englishmen. And the thing about Anglo-Saxon people is they don't like the idea of their country being controlled by a foreign leader. And so the barons, now this is 300 years before the Reformation, and they said, no, we don't want the Pope controlling our country. And they knew that the Pope wanted money. He wanted them to pay Peter's pence. And so this is why they got together with Archbishop Stephen Langton and they wrote Magna Carta. And they included
Wow.
no taxation without representation. Okay.
And a good heart these days is hard to find. True love.
Okay. That they were going to have representatives there with the king to prevent the king from fleecing them financially, economically, and sending their money down to the Pope in Rome. So this is why you got Shakespeare at one point. He has a line in the play King John where it says that no Italian priests shall neither tithe nor toll in England.
Wow.
So the English have always been very, very staunchly opposed to the idea of Romanism or popery controlling their country, even back when they were Catholic. You see what I'm saying?
Yep.
So it's not just because they became Protestant. The English Reformation goes on from there, and I think Magna Carta and then Wycliffe, John Wycliffe, really laid the groundwork for the English Reformation that happened later on. You know, once Luther comes along, he nails his 95 Theses. But these principles were being argued hundreds of years before it happened. And you look at what's happening to us right now in our country. What's happening? We've got people, we've got agents who I argue really work for foreign powers. They work for the Vatican, they work for the European Union, they work for Mexico and China. But they're not really working for us. And they're taking our money and they're just giving billions and billions of dollars away, like to Ukraine and this conflict there, and to all these different countries and causes all over the world. But they won't use those resources where they're really needed here in the United States. And this is what I see, the way I see it, just looking at this, you know, the span of history from Magna Carta in 1215 right up to the present day. In many ways, we're having the same struggle that our ancestors had centuries.
Chris, are you suggesting John Smith? That's the Mormon guy, isn't it? He's suggesting he was from the Catholics. Yeah, I didn't know that.
Years ago. Does that make sense?
Yes. So one thing that I want to tie
No,
together.
it's Joseph Smith. I'm not
Yeah.
sure.
I think it's interesting what you're saying about Catholics. Once again, we're not I'm not anti-Catholic for the people who have, you know, Catholicism. That's the religion. That's your own religion. That's your deal. But I think you can draw parallels here to extremism in the Catholic Church, the Vatican.
Mm-hmm.
You can draw a lot of parallels. Here, let's hear one. Popes Pius the what was it, 6th and 7th during the Nazi Germany time. In Nazi Germany, the Catholics lived in the south, the Protestants lived in the north, and even though when the vote,
And I know this already, most of the north got bombed. Most of the Protestant areas already know this.
for the Nazi Party and Adolf Hitler was not a majority by the southern Germany and the Catholics. Eventually, it was the Enabling Act of 1933 that saw a majority center party, Catholic Party of Germans who gave all domestic powers to suppress political opponents to Adolf Hitler in the Nazi Party. And they were supported by that. And in fact, it was the Vatican who also was surrounded by fascist Italy, Catholic,
it was
communist
too.
Italy, that the Nazis went and said, hey, we want your permission before we begin Dachau and all the other concentration camps, and was granted permission. And it was also the Vatican who helped in the rat lines to then take all of the remaining Nazis and push them into various different places around the world. But one of the biggest places they sent them was South America, which was, Chris, at that point in time, was a Catholic-based religion country.
Right.
Brazil, Argentina, Peru.
Yeah.
So it's wow, what an interesting correlation. And now sitting in our doorstep on the U.S.-Mexican border, a Catholic country, by the way, ruled by a communist dictatorship, which they call a president, and they're pushing through these hordes of people potentially into our country. May 11th will be the first footstep of anywhere between 300,000 and 1.8 million people. Those are the estimates. And law enforcement has no idea what to do. They're panicking. I've been informed of a meeting where they are panicking. They don't know what to do. The Texas governor wants to shut down the border. They may have to shut down other means of transportation until they can export all the brand new Americans into America. Oh, by the way, we can't pay for them. It's going to kill our economy. 2030 is the end of Social Security, announces the Social Security Administration, what, about a month or two ago? We are going to run out of money for Social Security in 2030.
Well, of course. They're sending it all to Ukraine. But I didn't mean to interrupt. Now you're absolutely right. These connections that you're making with South America and Venezuela and that whole territory, that they smuggled the Nazis out of Europe through what they call the Vatican rat lines. There's even a documentary that I used to talk about years ago, but if you can still find it, they've almost scrubbed it entirely off the internet. But it is called The Last Refuge. And it was actually a short documentary done by Sam Donaldson, very mainstream journalist at the time. And he sat down, interviewed the guys who had discovered this whole thing, and then interviewed one of the former OSS spies who admitted that, yes, the OSS, working with the Vatican and MI6 over in England, that they systematically smuggled some 60,000 Nazi war criminals out of Europe after the war. And many of them went down to South America and Venezuela and so on. But, and why? Because that has been Rome's Jesuit territory. I mean, what we're dealing with on the southern border and into America, you look at the people they put in charge like Majorca and others, we're dealing with Latin American Jesuitism. That's what we're dealing with. That's why the current Pope, Bergoglio, is from Latin America, and the Jesuit general, Arturo Sosa, again, from Latin America. And what do they speak? They speak Spanish. Who was the founder of the Jesuit order? Ignatius Loyola, a Spaniard.
Wow.
And the reason they're speaking Spanish is because Spain invaded those territories and took them over. So there's this whole link to the very origins of Jesuitism, and they see themselves as the flagship order for the Catholic Church, even though they ultimately want to destroy historic Catholicism and they want to destroy entirely biblical Christianity.
Wow.
But yes, they want to get control of America. I think there's no question. But what people should understand is that the Jesuits have been on American soil for over 400 years. You had Jesuit missionaries here even before the English colonies. And they were trying to get control of this continent. Well, what happened was the Spanish Armada was destroyed in 1588. That was their great power, the Armada, because you had the Huguenots, the French Protestants, tried to establish a colony down in Florida, in what is modern day Jacksonville. And what happened was they were set upon by the Spanish Armada. They go in there, they defeat them. They defeated the Huguenots, unfortunately. And then they tried to forcibly convert the survivors, who said no, they wouldn't convert. So then they slaughtered them. They massacred them.
Martyred them.
And that's why you have down there Fort Matanzas. Fort Matanzas, the word Matanzas means massacres, because that's where they massacred the Protestants.
Wow.
You see what I'm saying? So because of the power of the Spanish Armada, the Protestant territories couldn't colonize the New World because they were intercepted and they were being blockaded and prevented. But then once the Armada was destroyed, that obstacle was out of the way, and that paved the way for England to come in and begin the English colonies.
I have a question for you. When you speak of Ukraine, 72% of Ukraine is Orthodoxy, 9% is Catholic, 2% is Protestant, 2% is other Christian, 3% is labeled as other, 10% consider themselves atheists, and then there's a gray line, 2% that doesn't know what they are. Is Eastern Orthodoxy Christianity the same as Catholicism? Is there a link to the Vatican? Because they seem to be similar, but they consider themselves to be very different.
Yeah, they do. They have very similar doctrines. I'm not as familiar with all of the doctrines of the Eastern Orthodox Church. but they are very similar, like their veneration of Mary, the icons to the various saints and so on. They have a lot of similarities just in terms of what they believe. But there is a historic enmity and hatred between the two churches that goes back centuries and centuries. And when I say hatred, that I believe that's a key element for what's going on in Ukraine right now, because the conflict is between Eastern Ukraine, which is generally Catholic, versus, Western Ukraine, which is generally Catholic, versus the Eastern Ukraine, which is where you have the Russian Orthodox, even though they're all Ukrainians. But in the East, they are ethnic Russians who are members of the Orthodox Church.
Right. That whole Dnipro area, the Donbass region, and don't forget that the Azov Battalion, the neo-Nazi link for the Azov Battalion, comes from the Kiev area.
Mm-hmm.
So, and if people don't know this, Ukraine at that point in time during World War II donated the most amount of manpower to the Nazi SS battalions.
Mm-hmm.
They had the largest amount of SS battalions out of the 33 different nations who donated troops. And so that's why you still see a very strong Nazistic, gosh, I don't know how we'd say this, lifestyle almost. I mean, if you look at all the videos that is being showed from the Ukrainian troops, the Sieg Heil salute is all over the place. I've spoken to guys that are special operations who were over there during the very beginning of all this, and they were over there to try and actually rescue children for child trafficking, because that's one of Ukraine's like big money makers is child trafficking. And they said that Nazism everywhere, from the schools to the teenagers, the colleges, the mom and pop stores. They are still very much pro Adolf Hitler and the Nazi ideology, which is what we're funding, which is what the Catholic Church at one point in time was an approval of, even though Pius, I think it's 6th and 7th, didn't approve of it in the beginning. They ended up agreeing with it in the end.
Well, Pope Pius XII was Hitler's Pope.
That's right.
Was Hitler's Pope. And if you get the book Hitler's Pope, Cornwell explains that it was Pacelli, who was the Cardinal Pacelli. He becomes Pius XII. He's the one who brokered the deal with Hitler. And they had the Concordat between the Vatican and Hitler that got, as you mentioned earlier, the Catholic Center Party to give Hitler his absolute totalitarian power.
Right.
That was all through the Vatican. Okay. And this, let me give you a quote now that we show in one of our films, but you can find it in the book, The Secret History of the Jesuits by Edmund Paris. Paris was a French journalist, and he quoted from a communique from the Vatican to the Spanish dictator Francisco Franco on the day of Hitler's death, when Hitler died. And the Vatican sent a message to Franco and said, quote, Adolf Hitler, son of the Catholic Church, died while defending Christianity. And they declared Hitler to be a martyr.
Wow.
Now, when I first read that in Edmund Paris's book, I thought, wow, that is heavy. And then I stumbled upon a debate with the late Dr. Ian Paisley. Paisley, a very, very prominent guy over in the UK and very involved in the politics over there, but he was a Protestant minister. He preached the gospel relentlessly, but he was also a staunch opponent of Rome. He was known for denouncing the Pope as the Antichrist back in, I think it was 1988 or 98, back when Pope John Paul II came to the European Union. And but Dr. Paisley quoted from Edmund Paris's work and quoted that particular quote in particular. And scholars over in Europe, Protestants, they know that, yes, of course, the Vatican was behind Hitler. Of course they were. It was the Vatican that first set up ghettos for the Jewish people. Jewish ghetto. You had a Jewish ghetto in Rome for 300 years, all the way until the year 1870. That's where the whole idea of a Jewish ghetto came from. It was the popes that made the Jews wear yellow badges to identify themselves. That didn't come from Hitler. Hitler got that from the popes. You see what I'm saying? So people who knew what was going on, and they knew that history, it's why at the end of World War II, Churchill and Charles de Gaulle said, we've just come to the end of our second 30 years war. The first 30 years war was a struggle against Rome. And so they knew that Rome was behind a lot of the conflict that was going on with World War I and World War II.
Wow.
And what Hitler was trying to do was to become the Holy Roman Emperor. That's why they called it the Third Reich. Because this is a reference to the whole idea of the Holy Roman Empire, and the emperor was the secular power that the Pope could control. So, like when John Hus was burned at the stake, and then the Hussite Wars broke out, what happened was the Pope, Hus is burned at the stake, his followers are outraged, they have these uprisings, and then the Pope orders the Holy Roman Emperor to invade Bohemia and wipe out all the Hussites. You see what I'm saying? That was the construct of the Holy Roman Empire. So with the Vatican manipulating Hitler, it's the same relationship. You see what I'm saying? But it was happening in a much more covert manner.
So why is it that the Vatican now is trying to blend the three major religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam? Because you see the Vatican invading Protestant Christianity and trying to muddy the water constantly. But at least I don't pay attention to it too much, but I don't see the same type of manipulation for Islam as the Vatican does for Protestants. Why do you think that is, if you have an opinion on that?
Oh, yeah, certainly. Rome's number one enemy is Protestantism. The whole purpose of the founding of the Jesuit order was to launch the Counter-Reformation, which they did in 1540. And so the Counter-Reformation is to overturn the Protestant Reformation. Now, for the average person, people say, okay, well, why should we care about that? Well, the Protestant Reformation brought in freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of religion, freedom of conscience, the right to bear arms, private property protections, due process, castle doctrine, that you have the right to defend your home. As we're watching these ideas be systematically overturned, as they're trying to overturn free speech by coming up with hate speech laws and saying if you insult Islam, we're going to put you in jail and things like that, or if you misgender somebody, you're not using the right pronoun and this kind of thing. These are all attacks on the fundamental principles of liberty that were won by both word and deed on the fields of battle by our Christian ancestors. And you see what they don't teach in our schools anymore, brother, and this is it's why I made my film, The True Christian History of America, is that the principles of things like Magna Carta and free speech and publishing the Bible and reading the Bible, just having the freedom to read a Bible in your own language. These things weren't just declared by the reformers. They had to be fought for on the field of battle. I mean, Christian armies had to take up arms and go and fight wars for the freedom to preach the gospel. That's what the 30 Years' War was about. And what they've done is in the schools is they've just told everybody, oh, these wars of religion, that can, the Catholics and the Protestants fighting, oh, we just don't need to even talk about that. And people don't realize those wars that were fought, they were fighting for all of the liberties that we take for granted today. It wasn't the American Revolution that defined those things. Those things were being defined all the way back in the 13th century. That's why no taxation without representation. That's Magna Carta. But they wrote it, but then the Pope and the King turned their back on it, and then the barons had to take up arms and go to war. They had to fight. You see what I'm saying? When Hus is burned at the stake, they kill a man for preaching the gospel, for preaching the word of God, and the Hussites were outraged. They took up arms. They fought. And then they published the 4 Articles of Prague. The first article was the free preaching of Holy Scripture. You see what I'm saying? This is what's at stake with globalism, because the globalists, I believe globalism is an instrument of Jesuitism. And I don't just believe that, Doug, just because I happen to be studying the Jesuits right now, but because they themselves admit to it. Somebody sent me a link to a lecture at Georgetown University, which is a Jesuit university, where they had a professor there that they brought in. They said, well, we want this professor to give the history of the Jesuits. Okay. You go watch the lecture from this guy. We've got a link to it on our Facebook page. You watch the lecture from this guy, and he openly admits that the Jesuits are the ones who they were the first to develop globalism. And so the lecture is called The Jesuits and Globalism. And he argues that the first 30 years war was the attempt by the order to bring in a globalist form of government, because they were going to try and control all the countries of Europe. But he says, no, they were unsuccessful. They were defeated by Protestantism. And so that led to the birth of capitalism and the protection of the sovereignty, the national sovereignty of individual countries. And so that led to the Peace of Westphalia. That was the end of it. And what is called the Westphalian World Order. How many people do you know who know what the Westphalian World Order was or is?
Probably very little.
Yeah. But that's, in contrast, the New World Order is really the removal of the Westphalian World Order, because the Westphalian World Order acknowledges the national sovereignty of countries. Anybody can look this up. I mean, it's just basic history, but they don't teach it. So right now, open borders, right? Hey, we're going to open the borders and just flood everybody with all these migrants. That is the rejection of. In fact, when there's an article that I quoted from on Tony Blair, because Tony Blair is a big-time globalist, and he worked with Bush, who was also a big-time globalist. And Blair is part of the World Economic Forum. He's still active there. And but back when he was Prime Minister of England, the English newspapers had an article at one point, and they said that experts are referring to Mr. Blair as the beginning of the end of the Westphalian World Order.
Wow.
So in other words,
Wow.
Blair, for some reason, which I don't completely understand right now, but I'm still piecing together the parts of the puzzle. But Blair really advanced the mass immigration of Muslims into England and so on. But Blair represented the idea of the beginning of the end of the sovereignty, national sovereignty of countries in Europe, America, probably all over the world, based on what they're planning to do. I mean, they want to have open borders for the entire planet. It appears. Now how they're going to manipulate this beyond where we're at today, I don't know. Right now, it just seems like they are using immigrants from these third world countries into the more developed countries to systematically take them over.
And it would appear that Donald Trump is the new Jan Hus, who is, obviously a reformer in many ways.
It's only 2 weeks old.
He's not an isolationist. He's a nationalist, believes in nations' rights and not open borders. In your summations, do you think Trump is an enemy of the Vatican, or is he a
Good question.
puppet, like many claim?
Well, that's hard. That's hard to say. I mean, I've gone back and forth on that. I mean, Trump went to Fordham University. Fordham University is a Jesuit institution. At least two of his kids.
And also, he's Cabinet Supreme Court appointment. He's a Jesuit as well.
Unca and who's the not Don Jr. but his other son, Eric Trump, both went to Georgetown University. Georgetown University, of course, a lot of people go to Georgetown University. I always tell people, just because somebody went to a Jesuit institution doesn't necessarily mean
Good night, mate.
Jesuit. And I said that for years before Trump showed up.
Glad you found us, Chris.
It's true. Many people are. You know, they're conditioned by the order and their way of thinking when they are in those institutions. But there's like 28 Jesuit colleges and universities in our country. But Georgetown is the most influential. I believe it's the most politically influential institution in our country because it's at Georgetown that they train the spies for the CIA through the Edmund Walsh School of Foreign Service. But anybody can look that up. But where Trump is concerned, see, when Trump started running and he mentioned illegal immigration, which nobody else was talking about. And he's saying, you know, they're rapists and they're murderers and they're not sending us their best and this kind of thing. He said, I'm sure some of them are very nice people. And he goes on, and he's going after illegal immigration based on what I had studied up to that point, where, you know, in Islam, immigration warfare is the hijra. So the globalists are using Islamic immigration jihad. And then irredentism, that's Rome's version of immigration warfare. They're using both. They're using irredentism and hijra, and they're flooding all of these countries and trying to take them over.
Brother, I'm gonna have to stop you right there. We're about to run out of time. I want to have you back on so that we can get back into this, because
Okay.
we're just peeling off the second layer of this onion.
Yeah.
And I'll give you 2 minutes. What would you say is the most pressing thing that's going on right now that the Jesuits are trying, and where can people find all of your information at?
Well, I would say that, you know, to me, the number one issue, because it's the number one threat to the gospel, is the ecumenical movement, both theologically and politically. Theologically, because it denies that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, and that no man comes unto the Father but by him, and that Christianity is the only true religion, which our ancestors had always believed. So ecumenism denies that and tries to blend Christianity in with Islam and Hinduism and all these pagan belief systems. But the politics of ecumenism then becomes, they say, and this began with Vatican II, they make that declaration, and then they say, well, because Christianity is the same as Islam, now we have to have Muslims running for office. We have to have Muslims in Congress. We have to have Muslim mayors, and they have to control the politics of the Christian world.
Okay, guys, see you tomorrow. I don't have to take this one down, do I?
So this is advancing politically.
See you guys. God bless.
Christianity, the historic enemies of Christianity.